Prince smirks as a peasant bows before him. Just another day in the kingdom. But in the very next heartbeat, something happens that shatters the expected order of things. One bold act, one powerful response, and everything begins to change. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The autumn wind swept through the cobblestone streets of Ashford, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The sky above the English countryside hung heavy with gray clouds, threatening rain that would soon turn the roads into rivers of mud. In the heart of the town, where merchants hawked their wares and blacksmiths hammered iron into shape, the common folk moved about their daily tasks with heads bowed and shoulders hunched against the cold. It was a day like any other in this corner of the kingdom, where peasants toiled and nobles ruled, where the divide between rich and poor was as wide as the chasm between heaven and earth. Prince Edmund of Wessex rode through the narrow streets atop his magnificent black destrier, a beast as dark as midnight with muscles that rippled beneath its glossy coat. The prince himself was a sight to behold, tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders that filled out his rich burgundy doublet embroidered with golden thread. Over his shoulders hung a cloak of thick wolf fur, fastened at his throat with a silver clasp shaped like a roaring lion. His dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and his angular face bore the aristocratic features of his bloodline, a strong jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of storm clouds that surveyed everything before him with an air of casual superiority. At 24 years of age, Edmund was the eldest son of King Harold, heir to the throne, and he carried himself with the confidence of one who had never known want or hardship. Behind him rode a contingent of royal guards, 10 men armored in steel breastplates and chainmail, their red cloaks marking them as servants of the crown. Their horses' hooves clattered against the stones, announcing their presence long before they came into view. The townsfolk scattered before them like leaves before a storm, pressing themselves against the walls of buildings and shops, their eyes downcast in deference and fear. Edmund's lip curled slightly as he observed their reaction. This was how it should be, he thought, the natural order of things. He was born to rule, and they were born to serve. It was as simple and unchangeable as the cycle of seasons. The prince's attention was drawn to a commotion ahead. A small crowd had gathered near the town square, their voices raised in what sounded like argument. Edmund raised his hand, signaling his guards to slow their pace. He was curious, though he would never admit it. The tedium of royal life often left him seeking any diversion, no matter how trivial. As they drew closer, the crowd parted, revealing the source of the disturbance. A young woman stood in the center of the gathering, her hands on her hips, her chin raised in defiance as she argued with a portly merchant whose face had turned an impressive shade of crimson. The woman wore the simple clothes of a peasant, a dress of rough-spun wool in a faded blue color, covered by a leather vest laced up the front. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, revealing slender but strong forearms marked with the calluses of hard labor. A worn cloak hung from her shoulders, and her long chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid that fell past her shoulder blades, though several strands had escaped to frame her face. But it was her face that made Edmund's breath catch in his throat, though he would have died before showing such a reaction. Even from this distance, even dressed in rags, the woman was strikingly beautiful. Her features were delicate yet determined, with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and full lips currently pressed into a firm line of anger. Her eyes, large and expressive, flashed with intelligence and fire as she pointed an accusing finger at the merchant. "You charged me double what you asked yesterday," she declared, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the square. "I may be a simple farmer's daughter, but I can count, Master Pembroke. 2 copper pennies for a loaf of bread is highway robbery." The merchant sputtered, his jowls quivering with indignation. "How dare you accuse me of dishonesty, girl? The price is the price. If you cannot afford it, perhaps you should learn your place and cease your complaining." "My place?" The woman's voice rose, and Edmund noticed several onlookers wincing, as if they expected her to be struck down at any moment for her audacity. "My place is as a free woman of this town, entitled to fair trade and honest dealing. Or have the laws of England changed while I was tending my father's fields?" Edmund found himself leaning forward slightly in his saddle, intrigued despite himself. Peasants did not speak this way, not to merchants, and certainly not in public. They accepted their lot with bowed heads and grateful hearts, or so he had always been taught. This woman was different, and difference was rare enough to be interesting. The merchant's face grew darker. "Insolent wench. I'll have you know I'm a member of the guild, and my prices are set according to the quality of my goods. If you slander my reputation further, I'll see you brought before the magistrate for defamation." "Then let us go before the magistrate together," the woman shot back, crossing her arms over her chest. "And we shall see what he says about your quality goods when I present him with the moldy loaf you sold to Widow Blackwood last week." A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the crowd. Edmund's eyebrows rose. This was becoming more entertaining by the moment. Master Pembroke's eyes bulged. You dare. "I dare speak truth," the woman interrupted, her voice ringing with conviction. "Something you might try occasionally, Master Pembroke. It would be a refreshing change." At that moment, the merchant raised his hand as if to strike her. The woman did not flinch, did not step back. She simply stared at him with those remarkable eyes, daring him to follow through. "Enough!" Edmund's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. He had not intended to involve himself in this petty squabble, but something about the woman's courage stirred an emotion he could not quite name. Perhaps it was admiration, though that seemed impossible. How could he admire a peasant? The crowd immediately fell silent. Heads turned toward the prince, and as recognition dawned, people began dropping to their knees in hasty bows. Master Pembroke's face lost all its color, draining from crimson to an unhealthy gray in the span of a heartbeat. He fell to his knees so quickly, Edmund heard the crack of bone against stone. "Your Highness," the merchant gasped, pressing his forehead nearly to the ground. I had no idea you were. Please forgive this unseemly display." But Edmund was not looking at the merchant. His gaze had fixed on the young woman, who alone among the gathered crowd had not immediately fallen to her knees. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with what might have been shock or fear or perhaps defiance. For a long moment, their gazes locked, and Edmund felt something shift in the air between them, something he had no name for. Then slowly, as if moving through water, the woman lowered herself to one knee. Her head bowed, but not before Edmund saw the flash of emotion in her eyes. It was not fear, as he had expected. It was anger, burning bright and fierce as a forge fire. A smirk tugged at the corner of Edmund's mouth. How amusing. The little peasant girl was angry at being forced to bow, as if she had any choice in the matter, as if her pride meant anything in the face of his royal blood. "Rise," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Around him the crowd began to stand, brushing dirt from their knees, but keeping their eyes carefully averted. Edmund's guards had formed a protective circle, hands resting on the hilts of their swords, ready to cut down anyone who posed a threat to their prince. The woman stood, but she did not lower her gaze as the others did. She looked directly at Edmund, and he found himself strangely captivated by the directness of her stare. No one looked at him this way. No one dared. "What is your name?" Edmund asked, guiding his horse closer. The destrier's hooves struck the cobblestones with heavy thuds that echoed in the sudden silence. For a moment he thought she might refuse to answer. Her jaw tightened, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then, with visible effort, she spoke. "Rosalind, your Highness. Rosalind Ashford." "Ashford?" Edmund's smirk widened. "Named for the town itself? How quaint." He saw the flicker of irritation cross her face, saw how she fought to keep her expression neutral. It pleased him in a perverse way, this evidence that his words had struck home. "My family has lived in these lands for 6 generations, your Highness," Rosalind said, her voice carefully controlled. "We bear the name with pride." 6 generations of peasantry, Edmund mused, circling his horse around her slowly, examining her as one might examine a horse at market. "And yet you speak as if you have some claim to nobility. Tell me, Rosalind Ashford, did you attend the universities? Study rhetoric and philosophy with the learned men of the church?" "No, your Highness." "Then where did you learn to argue so eloquently? Where did you acquire such confidence in your own opinions?" Rosalind's eyes followed him as he circled. "My father taught me to read, your Highness. Books are not the exclusive province of nobles, though I know some would wish it so." Several people in the crowd gasped at her boldness. Edmund's guards shifted uneasily, unsure whether this constituted disrespect worthy of punishment. But Edmund himself felt a thrill of excitement. When was the last time anyone had challenged him, even in such a small way? Your father must be quite the educator, Edmund said, his voice dripping with mockery, to raise a daughter with such high opinions of herself. Does he also teach you that your place is to question your betters? To accuse honest merchants of fraud in the public square? Rosalind's cheeks flushed with color, but whether from embarrassment or anger, Edmund could not tell. My father taught me to stand up for what is right, Your Highness, she said quietly, to speak truth when I see injustice. If that offends Your Highness, then I apologize for my father's teachings, though I cannot apologize for following them. Edmund felt his smirk falter slightly. There was something in her words, in the way she held herself despite her obvious fear, that reminded him of the knights in the old tales. Honor and courage, even in the face of overwhelming power. It was admirable, in an absurd sort of way. And you believe you witnessed an injustice here? Edmund asked, gesturing to the trembling merchant still on his knees. This man, attempting to feed his family by selling bread at a fair price, and you, attempting to cheat him of his honest wages? That is not what happened, Your Highness, Rosalind protested, her voice rising despite her obvious attempt to remain calm. I paid what he asked yesterday. Today he demands twice as much for the same loaf. That is not honest trade. That is exploitation of those who have no choice but to buy from him. Edmund leaned forward in his saddle, his storm-gray eyes boring into hers. And what makes you think you have the right to judge what is fair? You, with your 6 generations of peasant blood, your rough hands, and your common dress? Do you truly believe your sense of justice carries any weight against the established order of commerce in my kingdom? He saw her flinch at his words, saw the hurt flash across her face before she could hide it. Good. She needed to understand her place. They all needed to understand their place. I think, Rosalind said slowly, her voice trembling slightly now, that justice should not be determined by the accident of one's birth, Your Highness. I think that right and wrong exist independent of whether one wears silk or wool. But perhaps I am mistaken. Perhaps in your world, truth changes depending on who speaks it. The crowd had gone deathly silent. Even the guards seemed to have stopped breathing. No one spoke to Prince Edmund this way. No one questioned his authority, his worldview, his right to determine what was true and what was false. Edmund felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. How dare she? How dare this insignificant girl, this nothing, this speck of dust, presume to lecture him about truth and justice? He should have her thrown in the stocks for her insolence. He should have her whipped for daring to question him. And yet something held him back. Perhaps it was the way she stood before him, trembling but unbowed. Perhaps it was the intelligence burning in her eyes, the quick wit of her responses. Or perhaps it was simply that he was bored, and she was the most interesting thing to cross his path in months. You have a sharp tongue, Rosalind Ashford, Edmund said finally, straightening in his saddle. Too sharp for your own good, I think, but I am feeling generous today. He turned to the merchant. Master Pembroke, what was the original price of the bread? The merchant stammered. Oh, 1 copper penny, Your Highness, but I assure you the increase was due to the rising cost of flour and— 1 copper penny, Edmund interrupted. Then 1 copper penny shall be the price. Sell your bread at the price you quoted yesterday, or find yourself explaining to the royal tax collectors why your accounts show such dramatic fluctuations in your costs. Master Pembroke's face went white. Yes, Your Highness. Of course, Your Highness. 1 penny it shall be. Edmund reached into the purse at his belt and withdrew a silver coin, which he tossed to Rosalind. She caught it automatically, her eyes widening in surprise. There, Edmund said, that smirk returning to his face. Buy your bread and keep the change. Consider it a gift from your generous prince, who has deigned to involve himself in your petty squabbles. He expected gratitude. He expected her to fall to her knees again, to press her forehead to the ground, and thank him profusely for his mercy and generosity. That was what peasants did when nobility showed them favor. Instead, Rosalind looked at the silver coin in her hand, then back up at Edmund. Her expression was unreadable. Thank you, Your Highness, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Your generosity is noted, not overwhelming, not extraordinary, not life-changing, just noted. Edmund felt his jaw tighten. The girl was impossible. Absolutely impossible. You are dismissed, he said coldly, pulling on his horse's reins to turn away. All of you, return to your business and be grateful I am in a forgiving mood today. The crowd began to disperse quickly, eager to escape before the prince's mood changed. Master Pembroke scrambled to his feet and hurried back to his stall, casting fearful glances over his shoulder. But Rosalind remained standing where she was, that silver coin gleaming in her palm. Edmund had ridden perhaps 10 paces when he heard her voice again. "Your Highness?" He turned in his saddle, annoyed and intrigued in equal measure. "What now, girl?" Rosalind walked toward him, her steps measured and deliberate. When she was close enough, she looked up at him, and Edmund saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. It was not fear or hatred or even anger anymore. It was something deeper, more complex. "Thank you," she said again, but this time her voice carried genuine emotion. "Not for the coin, though I am grateful for it, but for listening, for caring enough to ask what happened, even if you mock me for my answer." Most nobles would not have bothered. Edmund stared down at her, momentarily at a loss for words. He had expected many things from this encounter, but sincerity was not among them. "Do not mistake curiosity for caring," he said finally, his voice harsh. "I intervened because the commotion disturbed my peace. Nothing more. Do not imagine there is any greater meaning to it." Rosalind smiled then, a small, sad smile that somehow made her even more beautiful. "Of course, Your Highness. Forgive my presumption." She curtsied, a graceful movement despite her simple clothes, and turned to walk away. Edmund watched her go, watched the sway of her braid as she moved through the dispersing crowd, watched until she disappeared around a corner and was lost to sight. "Your Highness," one of his guards spoke hesitantly, "shall we continue to the castle?" Edmund blinked, shaking himself from his reverie. What was wrong with him? She was just a peasant girl. Nothing special, nothing worthy of a second thought. "Yes," he said curtly, "let us not waste any more time in this dreary place." They rode on through the town, but Edmund's mind was not on the road ahead. He kept seeing those eyes, that defiant chin, that spark of intelligence and courage. He kept hearing her words. "Perhaps in your world, truth changes depending on who speaks it." It disturbed him, how much those words had affected him. It disturbed him even more that he could not seem to forget her face. The castle loomed ahead, its gray stone walls rising against the autumn sky. Home, the seat of his father's power, and one day his own. Everything was as it should be, as it always had been, as it always would be. So why did Edmund feel as though something had shifted, some fundamental truth he had always accepted without question? Why did the certainty he had always possessed suddenly feel less certain? He dismissed the thoughts as they rode through the castle gates, greeted by the sound of horns announcing the prince's return. This was his world, the world he understood. Stone and steel, power and privilege, the unquestioned hierarchy that placed him above all others. A peasant girl with pretty eyes and a sharp tongue changed nothing, nothing at all. The great hall of Wessex Castle was a monument to power and wealth, its vaulted ceiling stretching high above the assembled nobility, like the rib cage of some massive stone beast. Tapestries hung from the walls, depicting battles won and enemies vanquished, their rich colors of crimson and gold glowing in the light of 100 torches mounted in iron sconces. Long wooden tables ran the length of the hall, laden with platters of roasted meats, fresh bread, wheels of cheese, and pitchers of wine and ale. The air was thick with the smell of food and smoke, punctuated by the sounds of laughter and conversation as the court gathered for the evening meal. Prince Edmund sat at the high table on the dais, his father King Harold to his right, resplendent in a doublet of deep purple velvet trimmed with ermine. The king was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, his once dark hair now liberally streaked with gray. His face bore the lines of a lifetime spent making difficult decisions, and his eyes, the same storm gray as his son's, surveyed the hall with the watchful gaze of a man who trusted no one completely. To Edmund's left sat his younger brother, Prince Geoffrey, who at 22 years possessed their mother's fair coloring, golden hair that fell in artful waves around a face that was perhaps too pretty to be called handsome. Where Edmund was broad and powerfully built, Geoffrey was lean and graceful, and where Edmund's presence commanded a room through sheer force of will, Geoffrey charmed his way through court politics with easy smiles and honeyed words. The brothers were as different as fire and ice, and the tension between them was palpable even now, as they sat side by side, carefully not looking at each other. "You seem distracted tonight, Edmund," King Harold observed, cutting into a piece of roasted venison with his knife. Troubled by something? Edmund blinked, realizing he had been staring at his untouched plate for several minutes, his mind wandering back to the encounter in Ashford, back to those defiant brown eyes and that sharp tongue. "Nothing of consequence, father," Edmund replied, reaching for his wine goblet, "merely tired from the ride." "Ah, yes, your little excursion to Ashford," Geoffrey interjected, his voice light and teasing. "Tell me, brother, did you find the peasants suitably grateful for the honor of your presence? Did they weep with joy at the mere sight of your noble countenance?" Edmund's jaw tightened. His brother had a talent for finding exactly the right words to irritate him. "They showed appropriate respect, as is proper." "Appropriate respect," Geoffrey repeated, swirling the wine in his goblet thoughtfully. "How terribly dull. And here I thought you might have had some adventure. Perhaps rescued a damsel in distress? Slayed a dragon? Oh, but wait. There are no dragons in Ashford, are there? Only honest folk trying to make a living." "Geoffrey," King Harold's voice carried a note of warning, "do not bait your brother at my table." "I apologize, father," Geoffrey said, though his smile suggested he felt no remorse whatsoever. "I merely wondered what could possibly interest our noble Edmund in a town full of common people. Surely not the quality of their bread?" Edmund felt heat rising in his cheeks. How did Geoffrey know? Had one of the guards spoken? Or was his brother simply making a lucky guess? "I intervened in a dispute between a merchant and a customer," Edmund said stiffly. "Nothing more. A minor matter, barely worth mentioning. And yet you mentioned it not at all," Geoffrey observed, "which suggests it was perhaps more interesting than you claim. Come now, brother. We're family. Share with us the details of this fascinating dispute." Before Edmund could respond, a voice rang out from further down the high table. His Highness showed great wisdom and justice as always. It was Sir Marcus, captain of the Royal Guard, a grizzled veteran with a scar running down his left cheek. A merchant was attempting to cheat a young woman, charging her twice the proper price for bread. Prince Edmund ensured she received fair treatment. "How noble," Geoffrey said, his eyes glinting with amusement. "And this young woman, was she grateful for your intervention, Edmund?" "She thanked me appropriately," Edmund muttered, taking a long drink of wine to avoid having to say more. "Appropriately," Geoffrey mused. "That word again. You seem very concerned with what is appropriate, brother. Tell me, was she pretty, this damsel you rescued?" Edmund nearly choked on his wine. "Her appearance is irrelevant to the matter of justice." "Ah, so she was pretty," Geoffrey concluded, leaning back in his chair with evident satisfaction. How delightful. Our stern and serious Edmund, moved to action by a pair of fair eyes. "That is not—" Edmund began hotly, but King Harold's hand came down on the table with a thud that silenced both princes. "Enough," the king said firmly. "Edmund, your brother seeks to provoke you, and you allow it. Geoffrey, you dishonor yourself and this court with your childish games. Both of you will cease this nonsense immediately, or you may leave my table and take your meal in your chambers like children who cannot behave." Both princes fell silent, though Geoffrey's smirk remained fixed on his face. Edmund stared at his plate, furious with himself for allowing his brother to get under his skin so easily. The meal continued in tense silence for several minutes before King Harold spoke again, his voice carrying across the table to ensure all the assembled nobles could hear. "I have received troubling news from the northern border," he announced. "Lord Blackthorn has been making incursions into our territory, testing our defenses. His forces grow bolder with each passing month." A murmur ran through the hall. Lord Blackthorn ruled the neighboring kingdom of Northmarch, and relations between the two realms had been strained for years, ever since a disputed succession had placed Blackthorn on the throne instead of his elder brother. "How many men does he have?" Edmund asked, grateful for the change of subject and eager to prove his worth in matters of state. "Our scouts report approximately 2,000 soldiers massed along the border," Sir Marcus replied. "Well armed and well trained. If Blackthorn decides to invade, we will need to respond with overwhelming force." "Then we should strike first," Edmund said firmly. "Show him that Wessex will not tolerate such provocations. A decisive military campaign would end this threat before it becomes a war." "Always so quick to draw your sword, brother," Geoffrey observed. "Have you considered that perhaps Lord Blackthorn merely wishes to negotiate? That his show of force is intended to bring us to the bargaining table?" "Negotiate what?" Edmund demanded. He has no legitimate claim to our lands. Any negotiation would be a sign of weakness. Or wisdom, Geoffrey countered. War is expensive, Edmund. In gold, in lives, in the suffering of our people. If we can achieve peace through diplomacy, is that not preferable to bloodshed? Peace through diplomacy is merely delayed war, Edmund shot back. Blackthorn respects only strength. Show him weakness, and he will exploit it. King Harold listened to both his sons, his expression thoughtful. You both make valid points, he said finally. Edmund, your martial instincts serve you well, but war should never be our first recourse. Geoffrey, your desire for peace is admirable, but we must not appear weak before our enemies. He paused, taking a long drink from his goblet. I will send an envoy to Lord Blackthorn, offering to discuss our border disputes. But I will also mobilize our forces and prepare for the possibility of conflict. We will hope for peace but prepare for war. Edmund nodded, though he felt disappointed. He believed his father was making a mistake. That strength alone would deter Blackthorn's ambitions. But he had learned long ago not to question the king's decisions in public. The conversation moved on to other matters of state. Tax revenues, crop yields, repairs needed to various castles throughout the kingdom. Edmund participated when required, but his mind kept drifting back to Ashford, to the town square, to a young woman with chestnut hair and defiant eyes. He wondered what she was doing now, probably sitting down to a simple meal with her father, in some small cottage with a thatched roof and earthen floor. Perhaps they were discussing the day's events, and perhaps she was telling her father about the arrogant prince who had mocked her even as he helped her. The thought bothered him more than it should have. Why did he care what she thought of him? Why did her opinion matter at all? After the meal concluded, Edmund excused himself and made his way through the castle's corridors to his private chambers. The rooms were large and well-appointed, with a massive four-poster bed draped in heavy curtains, a writing desk positioned near the window, shelves lined with books and maps, and a fireplace where a servant had already laid a fire that crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Edmund dismissed the servants and poured himself a goblet of wine, then stood at the window, looking out over the darkened countryside. Somewhere out there, miles away in Ashford, Rosalind was probably preparing for bed, unaware that the prince she had defied was thinking about her. You're being absurd, Edmund muttered to himself. She's a peasant, nothing more. But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't quite true. She was something more, something different. In a world where everyone deferred to him, where no one dared speak plainly or challenge his views, she had looked him in the eye and questioned his assumptions about truth and justice. It had been refreshing, terrifying, but refreshing. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called, expecting one of the servants. Instead, Geoffrey stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He had changed from his formal court attire into a more comfortable tunic and breeches, and his usual smirk had been replaced by an expression Edmund couldn't quite read. What do you want, Geoffrey? Edmund asked wearily. Come to mock me further? Actually, I came to apologize, Geoffrey said, moving to stand by the fire. I was cruel at dinner. I should not have teased you about the girl. Edmund studied his brother suspiciously. Geoffrey rarely apologized for anything. Why the sudden concern for my feelings? Because despite our differences, you are my brother, Geoffrey said simply. And because I recognize that look in your eyes. I've seen it before, in my own reflection. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? Geoffrey picked up the wine pitcher and poured himself a goblet. There was a girl 2 years ago, a merchant's daughter in Southampton. Beautiful, clever, completely unsuitable. I thought about her constantly, made excuses to visit the town, found reasons to pass by her father's shop. It drove me to distraction. Edmund felt a chill run through him. What happened? Nothing happened, Geoffrey said with a bitter smile. Because I am a prince, and she was a merchant's daughter, and some divides cannot be crossed. I married Lady Catherine, as father required, and the merchant's daughter married a wool trader. We both moved on with our lives. Then why tell me this? Because I see you making the same mistake I did, Geoffrey said, meeting Edmund's eyes, believing that your feelings matter more than your duty, that somehow, against all logic and tradition, things could be different. But they can't, Edmund. We are who we are, and they are who they are, and the world does not change because we wish it. Edmund turned back to the window, his jaw tight. I have no feelings for the girl. I merely found her interesting. An anomaly. Nothing more. Of course, Geoffrey said softly. Just as I had no feelings for Margaret, I merely found her interesting too. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. A word of advice, brother. Whatever you do, do not see her again. Do not make excuses to return to Ashford. Do not seek her out, because every time you do, it will become harder to walk away, and eventually you will have to walk away. We always do. He left without waiting for a response, the door closing softly behind him. Edmund stood alone in his chambers, staring out at the darkness. His brother's words echoed in his mind, sensible and logical and utterly maddening. Do not see her again. It should have been easy. He was a prince with a kingdom to help govern, military campaigns to plan, courtly duties to fulfill. He had no time to waste thinking about a peasant girl with too much pride and too sharp a tongue. And yet, even as he told himself this, even as he resolved to put Rosalind Ashford out of his mind entirely, he found himself wondering when he might have cause to return to that town, when he might have a legitimate reason to ride through those cobblestone streets again, just to ensure the merchant was following his orders, of course, just to verify that justice was being served. It had nothing to do with wanting to see those brown eyes again, to hear that clear voice challenge his assumptions, to feel that strange spark of something indefinable that had passed between them when their gazes met. Nothing at all. Edmund drained his wine goblet and went to bed, but sleep was long in coming. And when it finally did, his dreams were filled with chestnut braids and defiant smiles, with words about truth and justice, with the image of a woman who refused to bow, even when the world demanded it of her. In another part of the castle, Geoffrey stood at his own window, thinking about a girl named Margaret with golden hair and laughing eyes, wondering if she ever thought about him, knowing that it didn't matter if she did. Some stories, he had learned, were not meant to have happy endings. He could only hope his brother would learn that lesson more quickly, and with less pain than he had. 3 weeks passed before Edmund found his excuse to return to Ashford, 3 weeks during which he threw himself into his duties with almost desperate intensity. He trained with the castle guards each morning, sparring until his muscles ached and sweat soaked through his tunic. He spent hours in council meetings with his father and the royal advisors, discussing trade agreements and tax policies and the ever-present threat from Lord Blackthorn's forces in the north. He reviewed military reports, inspected the castle defenses, and did everything in his power to keep his mind occupied. It didn't work. No matter how exhausted he made himself, no matter how many tasks he took on, his thoughts kept returning to that encounter in the town square. He would be reading a report on grain production and suddenly remember the way Rosalind had stood her ground against the merchant, her chin raised in defiance. He would be discussing battle strategies with Sir Marcus and find himself wondering what she thought about the tensions with Northmarch, whether she feared war or believed in the possibility of peace. It was maddening. It was beneath him, and it was utterly unavoidable. The excuse came in the form of a complaint from the regional magistrate. Several merchants in Ashford had been accused of hoarding grain, driving up prices in advance of winter. King Harold, preoccupied with the situation at the northern border, delegated the investigation to Edmund. "Take a small contingent of guards," his father instructed during their morning meeting in the royal study, a circular room at the top of the castle's eastern tower, where maps covered every available surface. "Interview the merchants, examine their stores, and determine if the accusations have merit. If they do, impose appropriate fines and ensure the grain is distributed fairly." "Yes, father," Edmund said, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. "I'll depart this afternoon." King Harold looked at him sharply. "This is not a matter of great urgency, Edmund. Tomorrow morning will suffice. You seem unusually enthusiastic about what should be a routine administrative task." Edmund forced himself to appear calm and disinterested. "I merely wish to resolve the matter quickly, before the common people suffer from inflated prices. Justice delayed is justice denied." "Very philosophical." Geoffrey's voice came from the doorway, where he leaned against the frame with his characteristic smirk. "Since when did you become so concerned with the suffering of common people, brother? Could it be that Ashford holds some particular attraction for you?" Edmund felt heat rising in his cheeks. "The welfare of all our subjects is my concern, regardless of their station." "How noble," Geoffrey said, pushing off from the doorframe and sauntering into the room. "Though I notice you did not volunteer to investigate similar complaints from Thornbury or Westmarch. Only Ashford seems to inspire such dedication. Enough, Geoffrey, King Harold said tiredly. If you have nothing constructive to contribute, you may leave. Geoffrey bowed mockingly. As you wish, father. I merely thought to accompany Edmund on his mission. After all, 2 princes are better than 1 when it comes to intimidating grain-hoarding merchants. Absolutely not, Edmund said quickly, perhaps too quickly. This requires a firm hand, not your brand of diplomacy. My brand of diplomacy has resolved more disputes than your firm hand ever has, Geoffrey retorted. But very well, go alone to Ashford. I'm sure you have only the kingdom's interests at heart. After Geoffrey left, King Harold studied Edmund with an expression that made the prince uncomfortable. Your brother raises a valid point, though he does so mockingly. Why such eagerness to handle this personally? You could easily send Sir Marcus or another trusted official. I believe the presence of a member of the royal family will underscore the seriousness with which we take these complaints, Edmund said, meeting his father's gaze steadily. It will send a message that we are watching, that we care about fair treatment for all our subjects. King Harold was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But Edmund, be careful. I have noticed a change in you these past weeks. A distraction. Whatever its source, do not let it interfere with your judgment. I won't, father, Edmund promised, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost covering the ground like a blanket of crushed diamonds. Edmund rode out with only 4 guards this time, wanting to appear less intimidating than he had on his previous visit. The journey to Ashford took 3 hours, and with each mile that passed, Edmund felt his anticipation growing despite his best efforts to suppress it. He told himself he was being foolish. The chances of even seeing Rosalind were minimal. Ashford was not a large town, but it was large enough that one person could easily avoid another. She was probably working in the fields with her father, or perhaps she was at the market, though surely she would flee if she saw him approaching, eager to avoid another confrontation. The thought disappointed him more than it should have. They entered Ashford from the eastern road, and Edmund immediately noticed changes since his last visit. The town seemed busier, more prosperous. New shops had opened along the main street, and the buildings appeared better maintained. Or perhaps he simply hadn't been paying attention before, too focused on the spectacle in the town square to notice the details of daily life around him. "Where shall we begin, Your Highness?" Sir Marcus asked, reining in his horse beside Edmund's destrier. "The grain merchants' warehouses," Edmund replied. "We'll inspect their stores personally, count their inventory, and compare it to their sales records." They dismounted near the largest warehouse, a sturdy stone building with heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bands. The owner, a nervous man named Thomas Fletcher, practically fell over himself in his haste to unlock the doors and allow the royal inspection. "Everything is in order, Your Highness," Fletcher assured them, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the keys. "I swear by all that's holy, I have not hoarded grain. The prices reflect the true scarcity of the harvest, nothing more." Edmund spent the next 2 hours methodically examining Fletcher's warehouse, comparing inventory levels to sales ledgers, questioning the man about his suppliers and his pricing decisions. To his surprise, everything appeared legitimate. Fletcher had raised his prices, true, but only in proportion to the increased cost of purchasing grain from farmers who had experienced a poor harvest. The second warehouse told the same story, and the third. By mid-afternoon, Edmund was forced to conclude that the complaints, while understandable, were unfounded. The merchants were not hoarding grain or artificially inflating prices. The reality was simply that the harvest had been poor, and everyone, merchants and peasants alike, would struggle through a difficult winter. "We should inform the magistrate that no action is warranted," Sir Marcus suggested as they emerged from the third warehouse into the fading afternoon light. "The merchants are operating within the law." Edmund nodded, though he felt oddly deflated. He had accomplished what he came to do, resolved the matter efficiently and fairly. There was no reason to remain in Ashford any longer, except that he hadn't seen her. "Your Highness?" Sir Marcus was looking at him expectantly. "Shall we prepare to depart?" "Soon," Edmund heard himself say. "First I wish to walk through the market, to observe the conditions for myself, to see how the people are managing." If Sir Marcus found this request unusual, he had the good sense not to say so. "As you wish, Your Highness. Shall we accompany you?" "No," Edmund said quickly. "Wait here with the horses. I'll return shortly." He walked away before the guard could protest, making his way through the familiar streets toward the town square. The market was in full swing despite the late hour. Vendors calling out their wares, customers haggling over prices, children darting between the stalls. Edmund pulled his hood up, hoping to move through the crowd without being recognized, wanting for once to observe normal life without the weight of his title preceding him. It was a futile hope. Within minutes, people began to notice him, conversations falling silent as recognition dawned. They parted before him like water before the prow of a ship, bowing and murmuring respectful greetings. And then he saw her. Rosalind stood at a vegetable stall, examining a cabbage with a critical eye while the vendor watched nervously. She wore the same rough-spun dress as before, though this time her cloak was fastened against the cold. Her hair was still pulled back in that practical braid, though the fading sunlight caught hints of auburn in the chestnut strands that framed her face. Edmund's breath caught in his throat. For 3 weeks he had been telling himself that his memory had exaggerated her beauty, that no peasant girl could possibly be as striking as he remembered. He had been wrong. If anything, his memory had not done her justice. There was something about the way she moved, the graceful economy of her gestures, the intelligence evident in her expression as she weighed the cabbage in her hand and clearly calculated whether the price was fair. "This one is half rotted on the bottom," she said to the vendor, her clear voice carrying across the square. "I'll give you half the asking price." "Half!" the vendor sputtered. "Young miss, that cabbage is perfectly good." A few brown spots will be a few moldy spots by tomorrow," Rosalind interrupted. "And the day after, the entire cabbage will be inedible. Half price, or I'll take my custom elsewhere." The vendor grumbled but accepted her coins. Rosalind tucked the cabbage into her basket with a satisfied nod, then turned and froze as her eyes met Edmund's across the crowded square. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Edmund felt as though time itself had stopped, as though the entire world had narrowed to just the two of them, standing 15 paces apart in a market square while life continued around them unnoticed. Then Rosalind's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something more guarded. She lowered her gaze and began to turn away. "Wait," Edmund called out before he could stop himself. She hesitated, then slowly turned back to face him. Around them, the crowd had begun to notice the exchange, people stopping their business to watch with poorly concealed curiosity. Edmund crossed the distance between them, aware that every eye in the square was upon him, not caring. "Rosalind Ashford," he said formally. "We meet again." "Your Highness," she replied, dropping into a curtsy that somehow managed to be both respectful and perfunctory. "I had not expected to see you in our town again so soon." "I am here on official business," Edmund said, then felt foolish. Why was he explaining himself to her? "Investigating complaints about grain merchants." "Ah," Rosalind said. "And did you find evidence of wrongdoing?" "No," Edmund admitted. "The merchants appear to be operating honestly. The high prices are simply a result of poor harvests." "So we will pay more and get less," Rosalind said matter-of-factly. "The way of the world, I suppose." "It troubles you," Edmund observed. "The unfairness of it." Rosalind's eyes met his, and he saw that familiar spark of defiance. "Should it not trouble everyone, Your Highness? When good people work hard and still struggle to feed their families through winter, when circumstances beyond their control determine whether they eat or starve, yes, it troubles me, though I suppose such concerns seem petty from the height of a castle, where granaries overflow and tables groan under the weight of feasts." Edmund felt a flash of anger at her words, at the judgment implicit in them. "You know nothing of my concerns or what troubles me." "Don't I?" Rosalind shifted her basket to her other hip. "Forgive me, Your Highness. Clearly I have overstepped once again. It seems to be a habit of mine in your presence." "Why do you do that?" Edmund demanded, lowering his voice as he noticed the crowd pressing closer, eager to hear this exchange. "Why do you speak to me as though I am your enemy?" Rosalind looked genuinely surprised by the question. "I don't consider you my enemy, Your Highness." "Then what am I to you?" The question hung in the air between them. Rosalind studied him for a long moment, and Edmund found himself holding his breath, waiting for her answer. "You are a prince," she said finally, "and I am a farmer's daughter. What you are to me is irrelevant, because what I am to you is nothing at all. A momentary curiosity, perhaps. An amusing anecdote to share with your court, but nothing more." Her words struck him like a physical blow, perhaps because they came so close to how he had initially thought of her. An anomaly. A diversion from the tedium of court life. "You're wrong," Edmund said quietly. "Am I?" Rosalind's expression was unreadable. "Then tell me, Your Highness, why are you here? Why seek me out in this market square? What purpose does this conversation serve?" Edmund opened his mouth to respond and found he had no answer. Why was he here? What did he want from this woman who challenged him at every turn, who refused to show him the deference his position demanded? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the murmur of the crowd and the distant call of a vendor hawking meat pies. Finally, Rosalind spoke again, her voice softer now. "I should go. My father will be expecting me, and I have a long walk home." "Where do you live?" Edmund asked, then cursed himself for the question. What did it matter where she lived? 3 miles north," Rosalind said. "A small farm near the edge of Ashford Forest. We grow wheat mostly, some vegetables. Nothing that would interest a prince." "Let me provide you an escort," Edmund offered. "The roads can be dangerous as darkness falls. I've walked those roads my entire life, Your Highness. I know them better than any of your guards could." "Nevertheless, Your Highness," Rosalind interrupted gently, "please, let me go. Whatever this is, whatever reason brought you here today, it serves neither of us well. You have your world, and I have mine, and they are not meant to intersect." She was right, Edmund knew. Absolutely, completely right. He should let her go, should ride back to the castle and forget about her, should focus on his duties and his responsibilities and the life that had been planned for him since birth. "What if I don't want to let you go?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Rosalind's eyes widened, and for the first time since their conversation began, Edmund saw uncertainty in her expression. "Your Highness, Edmund," he interrupted. "My name is Edmund." "I know your name," Rosalind said. "Everyone knows your name. You are Prince Edmund of Wessex, heir to the throne, son of King Harold. What you ask is impossible." "What am I asking?" Rosalind looked at him for a long moment, and Edmund saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. Recognition, perhaps, understanding, the acknowledgement of something unspoken but undeniable passing between them. "I don't know," she said finally, "but whatever it is, the answer must be no, for both our sakes." She curtsied again, deeper this time, then turned and walked away. Edmund watched her go, watched her disappear into the crowd, and did not try to follow. Sir Marcus found him still standing in the square several minutes later, staring at the spot where Rosalind had vanished. "Your Highness, we should depart if we wish to reach the castle before full darkness." Edmund nodded mutely and followed his guard back to their horses. They rode out of Ashford as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Edmund did not look back, but he carried the image of Rosalind's face with him all the way home, along with the echo of her words. Whatever it is, the answer must be no. He knew she was right. He also knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that no was an answer he could not accept. Winter descended upon Wessex with unusual ferocity, transforming the landscape into a realm of white and gray. Snow fell in thick curtains, blanketing the countryside and making travel treacherous. The roads became impassable for days at a time, and the common folk huddled in their cottages, praying their stores of food and firewood would last until spring. For Edmund, the enforced isolation of the castle should have been a blessing. Trapped within stone walls by weather too dangerous for travel, he had no excuse to visit Ashford, no opportunity to seek out the woman who occupied his thoughts with increasing frequency. He should have been grateful for the respite, for the chance to clear his head and remember his duty. Instead, he felt as though he were suffocating. The castle that had always been his home now felt like a prison. The same corridors he had walked his entire life seemed to close in around him. The same faces that had surrounded him since childhood now irritated him with their empty flattery and political maneuvering. Even his father's war councils, which should have commanded his full attention given the growing threat from Lord Blackthorne, felt like elaborate charades where everyone played their expected roles without saying anything of real substance. "You're distracted again," King Harold observed during one such council meeting, his voice cutting through Edmund's wandering thoughts. "This is the 3rd time I've had to repeat a question." Edmund straightened in his chair, acutely aware of the dozen nobles and military commanders seated around the long table in the council chamber. Geoffrey sat directly across from him, watching with barely concealed amusement. "Forgive me, Father," Edmund said. "I was considering the logistics of moving troops through the mountain passes if Lord Blackthorn attacks before spring." It was a plausible excuse, and the king accepted it with a curt nod. "Sir Marcus was just explaining that our scouts have observed increased activity along the border. Blackthorn's forces appear to be fortifying their positions despite the winter weather." "Then we should do the same," Edmund said, forcing himself to focus on the matter at hand. "Double our patrols, reinforce our border garrisons, and ensure our supply lines remain open even in heavy snow, all of which requires significant resources," Lord Pemberton interjected. The elderly nobleman served as the king's chief financial advisor, and his perpetually worried expression had only deepened since talk of war began. "Our treasury is not limitless, Your Highness. Every soldier we deploy, every fortification we build, comes at a cost to other necessary expenditures." "What cost is too high to pay for our kingdom's security?" Edmund demanded. "None, if war is truly inevitable," Lord Pemberton replied. "But if there remains any chance of peaceful resolution, we should not bankrupt ourselves preparing for a conflict that may never come." "Spoken like a man who has never held a sword," Edmund said dismissively. "Edmund," King Harold's voice carried a warning tone. "Lord Pemberton's counsel has value, even if you disagree with it. We must balance military preparedness with fiscal responsibility." The meeting dragged on for another 2 hours, covering troop deployments, supply chains, diplomatic overtures, and contingency plans. Edmund participated when required, but his heart wasn't in it. His mind kept drifting to a small farm 3 miles north of Ashford, to a woman who was probably struggling to keep warm in a cottage that surely could not compare to the castle's roaring fireplaces and thick stone walls. Was she safe? Did she have enough food, enough firewood? The silver coin he had given her would have helped, but it could not have lasted this long. What if she was cold, hungry, suffering while he sat in comfort surrounded by luxuries she would never know? The thought gnawed at him. After the council meeting finally concluded, Edmund retreated to his chambers, but he found no peace there either. He tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. He tried to sleep, but lay awake staring at the canopy above his bed. He tried to drink himself into oblivion, but even wine brought no relief. A knock at his door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, expecting a servant. Geoffrey stepped inside, carrying a bottle of what appeared to be very expensive wine and 2 goblets. "You look terrible, brother." "Thank you for your observation," Edmund said dryly. "Was there a purpose to this visit, or did you simply wish to insult me?" "I came to drink with you," Geoffrey said, settling into a chair by the fire and pouring wine into both goblets, "and perhaps to offer some brotherly advice, if you're willing to hear it. I doubt I have much choice. You'll give it regardless." Geoffrey smiled and handed Edmund a goblet. "True enough. Very well, here it is. Whatever you're doing, stop. Whatever you're thinking about, stop thinking about it. And whoever she is, forget about her." Edmund took a long drink of wine. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," Geoffrey said. "That's why you've been walking around like a ghost for the past month. That's why you volunteer for every minor administrative task that might take you near Ashford. That's why you stare out windows like a lovesick minstrel composing ballads." "I am not lovesick," Edmund protested. "I merely... She interests me, as a person, as someone who challenges my assumptions and makes me think differently about the world." "Yes, that's exactly what it is," Geoffrey said sarcastically. "Intellectual stimulation. Nothing to do with the fact that you described her to me in your sleep the other night when you dozed off during dinner." Edmund felt heat rising in his cheeks. "I did no such thing." "You absolutely did. Eyes like autumn earth," Geoffrey quoted in a dreamy voice. "Hair the color of chestnuts in sunlight. It was quite poetic, actually. I was almost moved." "Mock me all you wish," Edmund said stiffly. "It changes nothing." Geoffrey's expression sobered. "That's what worries me, Edmund. It should change something. It should make you realize how foolish you're being." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "Do you remember what I told you about Margaret? About how I couldn't stop thinking about her? How I made excuses to see her? How it consumed me? I remember. Do you know what I didn't tell you? I didn't tell you that I almost gave it all up for her. Almost renounced my title, my inheritance, everything. I was prepared to walk away from the crown, from father, from you, from everything I'd ever known, just to be with a merchant's daughter. Edmund stared at his brother in shock. He had known Geoffrey cared for this Margaret, but not to such an extreme. What stopped you? Father found out, Geoffrey said quietly. He called me into his study and asked me one simple question. Who suffers if you abandon your duty? Not you, he said. Not Margaret. You would be free to live your simple life together, happy in your selfishness. No, the people would suffer. The kingdom would suffer. Your brother would suffer, bearing alone the burden that should be shared between you. The guards who have trained their entire lives to protect you would lose their purpose. The nobles who have pledged their loyalty to your family would be betrayed. All of it, all of them, sacrificed so that you could follow your heart. Geoffrey paused, taking a long drink of wine before continuing, and I realized he was right. My feelings, no matter how strong, did not justify the harm my actions would cause to countless others. So I did my duty. I married Lady Catherine, who is perfectly pleasant and perfectly boring, and whom I will never love the way I loved Margaret. And Margaret married her wool trader, and life went on. But you still think about her, Edmund said softly. Every day, Geoffrey admitted. Every single day for 2 years. And do you know what I've learned? It doesn't get easier. The wound doesn't heal. You just learn to live with the pain, to function despite it. You learn to smile at your wife and perform your duties and pretend that you're content with the life you've been given. The bleakness in Geoffrey's voice chilled Edmund to his core. That's no way to live. No, Geoffrey agreed. But it's the only way we can live. We are princes, Edmund. We don't have the luxury of following our hearts. Our lives were mapped out before we were born, our futures determined by bloodline and duty. Fighting against that is like fighting against the tide. You may struggle valiantly, but in the end, you'll drown. Edmund set down his goblet and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered courtyard below. Somewhere beyond these walls, beyond the reach of torchlight, Rosalind was probably in her cottage, unaware that a prince was thinking about her, that he was considering throwing away everything for the possibility of what, exactly? What if I don't care? Edmund said quietly. What if the cost doesn't matter to me? Then you're a fool, Geoffrey said bluntly. And worse, you're a selfish fool. Because it's not just your life you'll be destroying, Edmund. It's hers too. Edmund turned from the window. What do you mean? Geoffrey stood and moved to stand beside his brother. Think it through. Let's say you pursue this woman, this Rosalind. Let's say against all odds, against all sense and propriety, you somehow make her yours. What then? You cannot marry her. Father would never allow it, and even if he did, the nobles would revolt at having a peasant queen. So she becomes what? Your mistress? Living in the shadows, whispered about at court, scorned by the nobility and pitied by the commons? Is that the life you wish to give her? Edmund felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. He had thought about seeing Rosalind again, about speaking with her, about the inexplicable connection he felt in her presence. But he had not thought beyond that, had not considered the practical realities of what any relationship between them would entail. Or perhaps, Geoffrey continued relentlessly, you think to keep your relationship secret, to steal moments with her when you can, to meet in shadows and hidden places like common criminals. How long before someone discovers you? How long before whispers become rumors and rumors become scandal? And when that happens, who pays the price? Not you. You're a prince. You'll be forgiven eventually. But her? She'll be ruined, destroyed, cast out from polite society, if not worse. Stop, Edmund said hoarsely. I won't stop because you need to hear this, Geoffrey said firmly. You need to understand that there is no happy ending here, Edmund. There is no scenario where you both get what you want without destroying lives in the process. The kindest thing you can do, the most loving thing, is to stay away from her. Let her live her life in peace. Let her find happiness with someone from her own world. Don't drag her into yours. Edmund closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his brother's words settle over him like a physical burden. Everything Geoffrey said made logical sense. Edmund had been raised on duty and responsibility, had been taught since childhood that his wants and desires were secondary to the needs of the kingdom. He knew what was right, what was proper, what was required of him. And yet, I can't stop thinking about her, Edmund admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But she's there, in my mind, every moment of every day. The way she speaks, the way she challenges me, the way she looks at me as though I'm just a man, not a prince. I've never felt this way about anyone, Geoffrey. I don't even know what this feeling is, but I know I can't simply ignore it and hope it goes away." Geoffrey was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "That feeling is called love, brother, or at least the beginning of it. And you're right. It doesn't go away, but that doesn't mean you should act on it. Sometimes the most difficult thing we can do is acknowledge a truth and then choose not to let it control us. Is that what you did with Margaret?" "Every day for 2 years," Geoffrey repeated. "And I'll do it for the rest of my life because the alternative is unthinkable." After Geoffrey left, Edmund stood alone in his chambers for a long time, staring into the fire and trying to sort through the tangle of his emotions. His brother was right. He knew that intellectually. Pursuing Rosalind would be selfish and destructive, would bring harm to her and chaos to the kingdom. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were two very different things. A servant knocked and entered, bringing Edmund's evening meal on a silver tray. Roasted pheasant, fresh bread, cheese, winter vegetables preserved in oil, and a sweet tart for dessert. More food than Rosalind probably saw in a week, Edmund thought bitterly. He picked at the meal without appetite, his mind still churning. What was she doing right now? Was she hungry? Cold? Did she ever think about him? Or had their encounters been so brief and insignificant to her that she'd already forgotten his face? The questions tormented him through a long, sleepless night. And when morning came, bringing with it news that the weather had cleared enough for travel, Edmund made a decision. He would go to Ashford one more time. Not to see Rosalind, he told himself. Not to seek her out or speak with her. Simply to ensure that the townspeople were managing through the harsh winter, that no one was suffering unduly. It was his duty as future king to check on his subjects' welfare. That it would take him within 3 miles of Rosalind's farm was merely coincidence. That he might happen to ride past that farm on his way back to the castle was simple logic. It was on the route, after all. That his heart raced at the possibility of seeing her again was something he tried very hard not to examine too closely. Edmund summoned Sir Marcus and 4 guards, ordered horses prepared, and set out before his father could question his decision, or his brother could offer more unwelcome advice. The roads were treacherous with ice and packed snow, and the journey that normally took 3 hours stretched to nearly 5. But Edmund barely noticed the cold or the difficult terrain. His entire being was focused on the destination, on the possibility that awaited him in a small farm at the edge of Ashford Forest. He told himself he was being foolish, that Geoffrey was right, that this path led only to pain and destruction. But he rode on anyway, unable to stop himself, drawn forward by something stronger than duty or logic or common sense, drawn forward by a force he was only beginning to understand and already feared he could not control. The farm appeared through the bare trees like something from a dream, modest but well-maintained despite the harshness of winter. A small stone cottage sat at the center of the property, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin gray column that spoke of a carefully rationed fire. Beyond the cottage stood a barn, its wooden walls weathered but sturdy, and fields that stretched toward the forest's edge, now buried beneath snow, but clearly tended with care during warmer months. Edmund reined in his horse at the edge of the property, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold ride. He had not planned beyond getting here, had not considered what he would say or do if he actually encountered Rosalind. The excuse of checking on his subjects' welfare seemed flimsy even to his own ears now that he was here. "Your Highness?" Sir Marcus prompted. "Shall we approach?" Before Edmund could answer, the cottage door opened, and a man emerged carrying an axe and a bundle of firewood. He was perhaps 50 years old, with the lean, weathered build of someone who had spent his life in physical labor. His hair was more gray than brown, and his face bore the deep lines of sun and wind, but his movements were still strong and sure as he crossed to a woodpile and began splitting logs. This had to be Rosalind's father. Edmund dismounted, handing his reins to one of the guards. "Wait here," he instructed, then began walking toward the cottage before he could change his mind. The man looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, and his eyes widened in recognition and alarm. He immediately set down his axe and dropped to one knee in the snow. "Your Highness," he said, his voice rough but respectful, "this is an unexpected honor. I am William Ashford, humble servant of the crown." "Rise, please," Edmund said, uncomfortable with the deference. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I was traveling through the area and wanted to ensure that the people of Ashford are managing through this harsh winter. William stood slowly, brushing snow from his knee. Up close, Edmund could see the family resemblance. Rosalind had inherited her father's strong features and steady gaze, though her eyes were softer, more expressive. "We manage, Your Highness, by God's grace and hard work," William said. "The winter has been cruel, but we have stores enough to see us through to spring, provided we're careful." "And your family?" Edmund asked, trying to sound casual. "They are well? My daughter and I are both healthy, thank the Lord," William replied. "Though I confess, Your Highness, I'm curious what brings you to our small farm. Surely the welfare of two peasants does not warrant the personal attention of the Crown Prince." There was no challenge in William's voice, no presumption, only honest curiosity. Edmund found himself liking the man despite the awkwardness of the situation. "Your daughter and I met in Ashford some weeks ago," Edmund said carefully. "She impressed me with her intelligence and spirit. I wanted to ensure she was safe and well." William's expression shifted, becoming unreadable. "I see. My Rosalind has a tendency to speak her mind more freely than is perhaps wise. I hope she did not offend Your Highness." "On the contrary," Edmund said. "She was refreshingly honest in a world where most people tell me only what they think I wish to hear." "Honesty can be a burden as well as a virtue," William observed, "particularly for those born without the protection of title or wealth." He paused, studying Edmund with eyes that were far too perceptive. "Forgive me, Your Highness, but I must speak plainly. Why are you truly here?" Edmund opened his mouth to offer some platitude, some royal excuse, but found himself unable to lie to this man. "I don't know," he admitted. "I should not have come. I know that, but I wanted to see her again." William's expression grew troubled. "Your Highness, I mean no disrespect, but surely you understand that nothing good can come from such an interest. My daughter is a simple farmer's girl. Your worlds are too different. The gulf between your stations too vast. Whatever you feel, whatever has drawn you here, I beg you to consider the consequences for her." "I would never harm her," Edmund said quickly. "Not intentionally, perhaps," William agreed. "But intention and outcome are not always aligned, particularly when it comes to matters of the heart and differences in station." He gestured toward the cottage. "Rosalind is inside, preparing our midday meal. If Your Highness wishes to speak with her, I will not prevent it. But I ask that you think carefully about what you say and about what hopes or expectations your presence might create. My daughter is strong, but she is not immune to dreams that can never be." The words struck Edmund like a physical blow, echoing his brother's warnings. But before he could respond, the cottage door opened again, and Rosalind emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She froze when she saw Edmund, her eyes going wide with shock. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Rosalind recovered her composure and dropped into a curtsy. "Your Highness," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Rosalind," Edmund breathed, drinking in the sight of her. She wore a simple dress of brown wool beneath her apron, and her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. Her cheeks were flushed from the warmth of the cottage, and her hands bore the evidence of kitchen work. A small cut on one finger, flour dusting her wrists. She had never looked more beautiful. "I'll leave you two to speak," William said quietly. "But not for long. It's not proper for a young woman to be alone with a man, even a prince, perhaps especially a prince." He gave Edmund a meaningful look, then retreated to the far side of the property, resuming his work with the firewood but remaining clearly visible. Rosalind watched her father go, then turned back to Edmund. "Why are you here?" she asked bluntly. "What could possibly bring a prince to a farm in the middle of winter?" "I wanted to see you," Edmund said, abandoning all pretense. "I wanted to know that you were safe, that you had enough food and firewood, that you were managing through this harsh season." "As you can see, I'm alive and well," Rosalind said, her tone brittle. "Was there anything else, Your Highness?" Edmund moved closer, and he saw her tense, saw her hands clench in the folds of her apron. "Why are you angry with me?" "I'm not angry," Rosalind said. "I'm confused, and perhaps a little frightened, if I'm being honest." "Frightened? Of me? Of what your presence here means?" Rosalind clarified. "Of what people will think if they learn that Prince Edmund visited the Ashford farm, of what my father fears, and what I fear as well." "And what do you fear?" Edmund asked softly. Rosalind met his gaze, and Edmund saw a storm of emotions in her eyes. Confusion, fear, anger, and something else. Something that made his heart race. "I fear that you are going to make me hope for something impossible," she said quietly. "I fear that you are going to make me care about you, and that when you inevitably return to your world and forget about me, it will break something inside me that can never be repaired." Edmund felt as though all the air had left his lungs. "What if I don't want to forget about you? What if I can't? Then we are both fools," Rosalind said, her voice trembling slightly. "Because there is no future for us, Your Highness. Surely you know that. Surely you understand that whatever this is between us, it cannot lead anywhere good." "Stop calling me Your Highness," Edmund said, frustration creeping into his voice. "My name is Edmund. Use it." "I cannot," Rosalind said, "because using your name would make you real to me. It would make this real. And I cannot afford that because reality for people like me is harsh enough without adding impossible dreams to it." "What if it doesn't have to be impossible?" Edmund heard himself say, the words escaping before his rational mind could stop them. "What if we could find a way?" Rosalind laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A way? What way, Edmund?" She emphasized his name as if proving a point. "Will you marry me? Make me your queen?" Imagine the court's reaction when you present them with a peasant bride. Imagine your father's face. Imagine the scandal, the outrage, the political chaos it would create. "I don't care about any of that," Edmund said, though even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. He did care. He had been raised to care, trained from birth to put the kingdom's needs above his own wants. "Yes, you do," Rosalind said gently. "And you should. You are going to be king one day, Edmund. You have responsibilities that extend far beyond your personal happiness. I understand that, even if you seem determined to forget it in this moment." Edmund ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "So what are you saying? That we should never see each other again? That we should pretend this connection between us doesn't exist?" "I'm saying that we should be realistic," Rosalind said. "I'm saying that we should recognize this for what it is. An attraction, yes, but one that can lead nowhere good. Better to end it now, before anyone gets hurt." "I think it's too late for that," Edmund said quietly. "I think we're both already hurt." Rosalind's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them back. "Then let us not make it worse. Please, Edmund, go back to your castle. Marry some noble lady who will give you political alliances and beautiful children and a life befitting your station. Let me stay here on my farm, where I belong. It's better this way, safer." "Safer for whom?" "For both of us," Rosalind said. "For everyone." They stood in silence for a moment, the winter wind whipping around them, carrying flakes of snow that had begun to fall again. Edmund wanted to argue, to protest, to insist that there had to be some solution they weren't seeing. But looking into Rosalind's eyes, seeing the pain and wisdom there, he found he had no words. "May I ask you something?" Edmund said finally. Rosalind nodded. "If circumstances were different," Edmund said carefully, "if I were not a prince and you were not a farmer's daughter, if we were simply two people who met by chance in a market square, would you want to see me again?" Rosalind closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped to trail down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes. But we are not simply two people, Edmund. We are exactly who we are, and we cannot change that no matter how much we might wish to." Edmund reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. Rosalind's eyes flew open at the touch, and Edmund saw his own longing reflected in them. "I don't accept that," Edmund said. "I refuse to believe that our circumstances define the entirety of what's possible between us." "Then you are setting yourself up for heartbreak," Rosalind said, though she did not pull away from his touch. "And taking me with you. Perhaps heartbreak is worth it," Edmund said, "if the alternative is never knowing what we might have been to each other. Or perhaps heartbreak is a luxury that neither of us can afford," Rosalind countered. But her hand came up to cover his where it still rested against her cheek, and Edmund felt hope flare in his chest despite everything. The moment was broken by William's voice calling from across the property. "Your Highness, forgive the interruption, but the weather is turning. If you wish to reach the castle before the storm worsens, you should depart soon." Edmund looked up and realized that William was right. The light snowfall had intensified, and dark clouds were rolling in from the north. He reluctantly dropped his hand from Rosalind's face. "I should go," he said. "Yes, Rosalind agreed. You should. Will you think about what I said? Edmund asked. About finding a way? I think about little else, Rosalind admitted. But thinking and doing are different things, Edmund. Dreaming and living are different things. I can dream about impossibilities all I want, but I must still live in reality. Edmund wanted to kiss her. The urge was so strong it was almost painful. He wanted to pull her into his arms and show her with actions what he could barely express with words. But William was watching, and the guards were watching, and such an action would only prove Rosalind's point about the impossibility of their situation. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Rosalind's breath caught, and Edmund saw color flood her cheeks. Thank you for your honesty, Edmund said formally, for the benefit of their audience. I wish you and your father well through the remainder of winter. Travel safely, Your Highness, Rosalind replied, matching his formal tone, though her eyes told a different story. May God keep you from harm. Edmund forced himself to turn away, to walk back to his horse, to mount and gather the reins. Every step felt like tearing away a piece of himself. He looked back once and saw Rosalind still standing where he'd left her, one hand raised in farewell, her expression a mixture of sadness and something that might have been hope. The ride back to the castle was miserable. The storm that William had predicted materialized with a vengeance, snow falling so thickly that visibility dropped to mere feet. The horses struggled through deepening drifts, and the wind cut through even the heaviest cloaks. By the time they reached the castle, Edmund was half frozen and thoroughly exhausted, but his physical discomfort was nothing compared to the turmoil in his mind and heart. Every word of his conversation with Rosalind played over and over in his thoughts. Her tears, her wisdom, her admission that she would want to see him again if circumstances were different. Geoffrey was waiting in Edmund's chambers when he finally made it inside, warming himself by the fire. You went to see her, Geoffrey said without preamble. It wasn't a question. Yes, Edmund admitted, too tired to deny it. And she told me essentially what you told me, that it's impossible, that we should stay apart, that pursuing this will only lead to pain. She's wise, this peasant girl of yours, Geoffrey observed. She is, Edmund agreed, far wiser than I am apparently. But Geoffrey, there's something between us, something real and powerful and undeniable. I felt it the first moment I saw her, and it's only grown stronger. How can I simply ignore that? How can I pretend it doesn't exist? Geoffrey was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Do you remember the old story Father used to tell us? About the fisherman who caught a star that fell from the sky? Edmund nodded. It had been one of their favorite tales as children. The star was the most beautiful thing the fisherman had ever seen, Geoffrey continued, and he loved it desperately. But every day he kept it, it grew dimmer. And finally, a wise woman told him that stars belong in the sky, not in fishermen's nets, that keeping it would eventually kill it. So the fisherman did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He let the star go, and it returned to the heavens, where it shone brighter than ever. And the fisherman, Edmund asked quietly, spent the rest of his life looking up at that star, Geoffrey finished, missing it, loving it from afar, but knowing he had done the right thing, even though it broke his heart. Edmund closed his eyes. I hate that story. So do I, Geoffrey said, but that doesn't make it any less true. After Geoffrey left, Edmund stood at his window watching the storm rage outside, thinking about stars and fishermen, about duty and desire, about a woman with brown eyes and a brave heart who deserved so much better than what he could offer her. And he realized, with a clarity that was both liberating and devastating, that Rosalind was right. There was no future for them, no happy ending waiting to be written. Only pain and scandal and destruction if he continued to pursue this impossible dream. The kindest thing he could do, the most loving thing, was to stay away, even if it killed him. 3 months passed, and Edmund kept his resolution. He did not return to Ashford. He did not seek out Rosalind. He threw himself into his duties with a fervor that bordered on obsession, as if constant work could somehow fill the emptiness that had taken up residence in his chest. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and transforming the frozen landscape into fields of green dotted with wildflowers. The roads became passable again, and with the improved weather came news that made Edmund's blood run cold. Lord Blackthorne had made his move. The attack came at dawn on a mild April morning. Blackthorn's forces swept across the border in a coordinated assault, overwhelming 3 of Wessex's northern garrisons before anyone could mount an effective defense. By the time messengers reached the castle with news of the invasion, Blackthorn's army had already penetrated 20 miles into Wessex territory and showed no signs of stopping. King Harold called an emergency war council, and the castle erupted into controlled chaos. Soldiers were mobilized, supplies gathered, weapons distributed. Edmund found himself finally able to focus completely on something other than Rosalind: survival, both his own and his kingdom's. "We'll ride north with 5,000 men," King Harold announced to the assembled commanders, his finger tracing routes on a large map spread across the council table. "We'll engage Blackthorn's forces here, at the river crossing, where the terrain favors defensive positions. Sir Marcus, you'll command the vanguard. Lord Pemberton, you'll remain here to govern in my absence." "And me, father?" Edmund asked. King Harold looked at his eldest son, and Edmund saw both pride and worry in his father's eyes. "You'll ride at my side, as befits the heir to the throne. It's time you experienced real war, not just training exercises and theoretical discussions. But Edmund," the king's voice softened slightly, "stay close to me. Don't take unnecessary risks. You are too valuable to this kingdom to throw your life away on foolish heroics." "I understand, father," Edmund replied, though part of him yearned for the chance to prove himself in battle, to channel all his pent-up frustration and pain into something productive. Geoffrey, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "What of me? Surely I can be of use in this campaign." "You will remain here," King Harold said firmly. "If Edmund and I both fall, you become king. Someone of royal blood must survive to ensure the succession." Geoffrey's face flushed with anger and humiliation, but he bowed his head in acceptance. "As you command, your majesty." The preparations took 2 days, and Edmund barely slept during that time. When he did manage to close his eyes, his dreams were a confused tangle of battles and brown eyes, of swords and soft voices, of blood and tears. He woke each time feeling more exhausted than before he'd slept. On the morning of departure, Edmund stood in the castle courtyard watching as 5,000 men assembled in organized chaos. Horses whinnied and stamped, armor clanked, weapons rattled. The air smelled of leather and steel and the nervous sweat of men preparing to face death. Edmund wore his battle armor for the first time outside of ceremonial occasions, a full suit of plate armor decorated with the royal crest, polished to a mirror shine by his squire. A heavy cloak of deep blue hung from his shoulders, and at his side hung a longsword that had belonged to his grandfather, its blade inscribed with words from an ancient prayer: "Lord, make me an instrument of justice." "You look every inch the warrior prince," Geoffrey said, approaching from behind. His voice carried a note of something that might have been envy, or concern, or both. "Try not to get yourself killed proving it." "I'll do my best," Edmund said, adjusting his gauntlets. "Geoffrey, if something does happen to me—" "Don't," Geoffrey interrupted. "Don't say goodbye as if you're not coming back. You're too stubborn to die, Edmund. You'll survive this war through sheer force of will, just like you do everything else." Edmund smiled faintly. "Look after father if I can't. And if you happen to be near Ashford for any reason, there's a farm 3 miles north of town. A man named William Ashford and his daughter Rosalind. They're good people. Make sure they're protected if fighting comes to that area." Geoffrey's expression shifted to understanding and sadness. "You still think about her?" "Every day," Edmund admitted. "Every moment of every day. But you were right, Geoffrey, about all of it. So I stayed away just as you advised, just as she asked me to. And it's been the most miserable 3 months of my life." "I know," Geoffrey said quietly. "But you did the right thing. The honorable thing." "The honorable thing feels remarkably like cowardice," Edmund observed. "Often it does," Geoffrey agreed. "That's how you know it's truly honor, and not just self-interest disguised as virtue." He clasped Edmund's shoulder. "Come back alive, brother. I'm not ready to be king yet." King Harold called for Edmund, and the brothers parted. Edmund mounted his destrier, a different one than he usually rode, a massive gray war horse trained specifically for battle. The army began its march north, a river of men in steel flowing out of the castle gates and onto the road. The journey to the river crossing took 4 days of hard riding. They passed through villages where people came out to watch them pass, some cheering, some silent and afraid. They passed through Ashford on the second day, and Edmund found his eyes scanning the crowds despite himself, searching for a familiar face among the onlookers. He didn't see her, which was both a relief and a disappointment. On the afternoon of the fourth day, they reached the river crossing and began preparing their defensive positions. The location was well chosen, a narrow point where the river could be forded, with hills on either side, providing high ground for archers. If they could hold this position, they could stop Blackthorn's advance and perhaps even turn the tide of the war. Edmund worked alongside the soldiers, helping to dig trenches and position stakes, refusing the special treatment his rank might have afforded him. The men respected him for it, and he found that physical labor helped quiet his churning thoughts. That night, sitting by a campfire with Sir Marcus and several other commanders, Edmund stared into the flames and thought about what tomorrow might bring. This would be his first real battle. His first test, not of skill in the practice yard, but of courage under actual threat of death. He wondered if he would be brave. He wondered if he would survive. And he wondered, with an ache that had become familiar over the past months, what Rosalind would think if she knew he was here, preparing to risk his life for the kingdom. Would she care? Would she worry? Or had she put him out of her mind as thoroughly as he had tried, and failed to put her out of his? "Nervous, Your Highness?" Sir Marcus asked, noticing Edmund's distraction. "Thoughtful," Edmund corrected, wondering what the morning will bring. "Death for some, victory for others, if we're lucky," Sir Marcus said pragmatically. "I've fought in 7 major battles, Your Highness, and I've learned that fear before battle is not weakness. It's wisdom. The men who aren't afraid are either fools or liars." "And which are you?" Edmund asked with a slight smile. "A bit of both, probably," Sir Marcus admitted, "but mostly just old and tired." He paused, then added, "Your Highness, if I may speak plainly, always. If the battle turns against us tomorrow, if things look desperate, your duty is to survive. Not to be a hero, not to prove your courage, but to live so that you can lead this kingdom one day. King Harold is a great king, but he's getting older. This kingdom needs you, Your Highness. Don't throw that away for glory." Edmund nodded slowly. "I'll remember that. Thank you, Sir Marcus." But even as he made the promise, Edmund wondered if he could keep it. There was something seductive about the idea of battle, of testing himself against mortal danger. A part of him, the part that had been frustrated and heartbroken for months, almost welcomed the prospect of channeling all that pain into something immediate and violent. At least in battle, the enemy was clear. At least in battle, right and wrong were defined by the blade in your hand and the man trying to kill you. None of the complicated moral ambiguity that plagued his feelings for Rosalind, none of the impossible choices between duty and desire. Just survival. Simple and pure and uncomplicated. Sleep came fitfully that night, and Edmund's dreams were dark and violent. He woke before dawn to the sound of horns. Blackthorn's army had been spotted approaching from the north. The battle began with arrows, thousands of them darkening the sky as both sides' archers exchanged volleys. Edmund stood with his father on a hill overlooking the river, watching as the first wave of Blackthorn's soldiers attempted to ford the water. Many fell to arrows before they reached the far bank, their bodies swept away by the current. But many more made it across, and then steel met steel with a sound like thunder. "Hold the line!" King Harold roared, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Do not let them establish a foothold." Edmund's hand gripped his sword hilt so tightly his knuckles ached. Every instinct screamed at him to charge down the hill, to join the fighting, to do something other than stand and watch. But his father had ordered him to stay close, and so he stayed, though it took every ounce of discipline he possessed. The battle raged for hours. Blackthorn's forces were larger than the scouts had reported, perhaps 7,000 men to Wessex's 5,000. But Wessex held the superior position, and King Harold's tactical genius kept them organized and effective even as exhaustion began to set in. It was mid-afternoon when disaster struck. A contingent of Blackthorn's cavalry found a secondary ford point half a mile downriver, one that the scouts had missed or dismissed as too shallow. They crossed in force and began attacking Wessex's flank, threatening to encircle the entire army. "We have to reinforce the left flank," Edmund said urgently, pointing to where Wessex's lines were buckling under the unexpected assault. "If they break through there, we'll be surrounded." King Harold's face was grim. "You're right. Sir Marcus, take 300 men and shore up that position. Edmund, you—" A shout of alarm interrupted him. A group of Blackthorn's soldiers had broken through the center line and were charging up the hill, heading straight for the king's position. There were perhaps 20 of them, but they were moving fast and with obvious purpose. They had identified King Harold and were attempting to kill or capture him. Edmund didn't think. He simply reacted, drawing his sword and placing himself between his father and the oncoming soldiers. The royal guard formed up around them, but they were outnumbered and the enemy had momentum. The first soldier to reach Edmund swung a battle axe with brutal force. Edmund parried, feeling the impact jar up his arm, then riposted with a strike that caught the man in the throat. The soldier fell, and there was no time to think about the life he'd just taken because 2 more were already upon him. Training took over. Years of practice in the yard. Thousands of hours drilling forms and techniques, all condensed into instinct and muscle memory. Edmund fought with a fury born of months of suppressed emotion, channeling all his frustration and pain into each strike and parry. He was dimly aware of his father fighting beside him, of the royal guard engaging the other attackers, but his entire world had narrowed to the opponents before him and the need to survive. Blood sprayed across his armor. Men screamed and fell. The smell of death filled his nostrils. And then it was over. The attackers lay dead or dying, and Edmund stood panting, his sword dripping red, his armor dented and scratched but intact. "Are you injured?" King Harold demanded, gripping Edmund's shoulder and looking him over with worried eyes. "No, father," Edmund managed. "I'm fine." "You fought well," the king said, and Edmund heard the pride in his voice. "You saved my life, and the lives of your men. But Edmund, listen to me." Another horn blast cut through the air, this one from Wessex's forces. Sir Marcus had successfully reinforced the left flank, and Blackthorn's cavalry was being driven back toward the river. Seeing their surprise attack fail and their casualties mounting, Blackthorn's army began a fighting retreat. The Battle of River Crossing was over, and Wessex had won. But the victory felt hollow to Edmund as he looked at the carnage around him, at the bodies of men who had woken up that morning and would never see another sunrise. He had killed today 3 men, maybe 4. It had all happened so fast he couldn't be sure. He had taken lives, ended futures, made widows and orphans. And the worst part was how easy it had been, how natural, how his body had known exactly what to do even as his mind reeled from the reality of it. "The first battle is always the hardest," King Harold said quietly, as if reading his son's thoughts. "You never forget the first man you kill. But Edmund, you did what was necessary to protect yourself and others. There is no shame in that." That night, as the army made camp and tended to their wounded, Edmund sat alone by a fire and stared at his hands. He had washed them, scrubbed them until they were raw, but he could still feel the phantom sensation of blood. He thought about Rosalind, about her question from months ago. Perhaps in your world, truth changes depending on who speaks it. What would she think of him now? Would she see him as a hero who had defended his kingdom, or as a killer who had taken lives, regardless of the justification? The question haunted him through another sleepless night, and would continue to haunt him for days to come. The victory at River Crossing broke Blackthorn's advance, but it did not end the war. Over the following weeks, skirmishes erupted along the border as both sides tested each other's defenses. King Harold established a fortified camp near the river crossing, transforming the battlefield into a staging ground for further operations. Edmund remained at his father's side, learning the brutal realities of military command and discovering that war consisted mostly of waiting, planning, and managing logistics, punctuated by brief moments of terrifying violence. Edmund changed during those weeks. The idealistic prince who had ridden north seeking glory and purpose was replaced by someone harder, more pragmatic. He learned to make decisions that meant some men would live and others would die. He learned to sleep despite the screams of the wounded in the medical tents. He learned to eat while discussing casualty reports, to laugh at crude jokes around campfires, even as bodies were being buried in mass graves beyond the firelight. But through all of it, through all the blood and death and moral compromises, one thought remained constant: Rosalind. She was there in his dreams when exhaustion finally claimed him. She was there in his waking thoughts during the long hours of planning and waiting. He wondered what she was doing, whether she was safe, whether she ever thought of him. The wondering was both comfort and torment, a reminder that somewhere beyond this world of violence and death, normal life continued. and in that normal life was a woman who had touched his heart in ways he still didn't fully understand. It was early May when a messenger arrived from the castle bearing urgent news. Edmund was in the command tent reviewing supply manifests when the young rider was shown in, mud-splattered and exhausted from hard riding. "Your Majesty," the messenger said, bowing first to King Harold and then to Edmund, "I bring news from the capital. Lord Blackthorn has sent envoys requesting a parley." King Harold set down the report he'd been reading. "On what terms?" "He proposes a meeting between yourself and him, Your Majesty. Neutral ground, both leaders attended by no more than 10 guards each. He says he wishes to discuss ending hostilities." "It's a trap," Edmund said immediately. "Blackthorn has no reason to sue for peace. We've checked his advance, but we haven't defeated him decisively. This is some ploy to get you into the open where you're vulnerable." "Perhaps," King Harold said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps he's realized that this war is bankrupting both our kingdoms and killing our people to no good purpose. The question is whether the risk of meeting him is worth the potential reward of ending this conflict." "The risk is your life, Father," Edmund protested. "And if you die, the kingdom falls into chaos. It's not worth it." King Harold smiled faintly. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare, son, but I am not so old or foolish that I cannot assess risk appropriately. If there is even a chance of ending this war through negotiation, I must take it. The alternative is months, perhaps years, of continued fighting. More battles like river crossing. More dead young men who will never return to their families." Edmund wanted to argue further, but he recognized the set of his father's jaw. The king had made his decision. The parley was scheduled for 3 days hence, to take place at a ruined monastery that sat exactly at the midpoint between the two armies' positions. King Harold spent those 3 days in consultation with his advisors, preparing negotiating positions and discussing what concessions he might accept. On the morning of the parley, Edmund insisted on being among the 10 guards who would accompany his father. "Absolutely not," King Harold said flatly. "If something goes wrong, if this is indeed a trap, I will not have both of us at risk." "Then send me in your place," Edmund countered. "Let me negotiate with Blackthorn. I am the heir. I have the authority to speak for the crown. You are also young and inexperienced in diplomacy," King Harold said, but his tone was gentler now. "Edmund, I know you want to protect me. I know you feel responsible for my safety after saving my life at river crossing, but this is not a burden you can carry. Some risks I must take alone." In the end, Edmund was forced to remain at camp while his father rode out with Sir Marcus and 9 other trusted guards. Edmund stood on the hill overlooking the ruined monastery, watching through a spyglass as the two parties converged on the neutral ground. King Harold and Lord Blackthorn met in the monastery's courtyard, their respective guards forming a perimeter. Even from this distance, Edmund could see Blackthorn clearly, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a bearing that spoke of military experience and ruthless determination. The two leaders talked for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. Edmund's hands clenched and unclenched on the spyglass, his entire body tense with anxiety. Every moment he expected to see Blackthorn's guards draw weapons, expected to see his father fall, but it didn't happen. Instead, after their discussion concluded, King Harold and Lord Blackthorn clasped hands briefly in what appeared to be agreement, then returned to their respective parties and rode away. Edmund nearly collapsed with relief when his father rode back into camp, alive and unharmed. "Well?" Edmund demanded before the king had even dismounted. "What happened? What did he want?" King Harold dismounted wearily and gestured for Edmund to follow him into the command tent. Once inside, with the tent flaps closed for privacy, the king poured himself wine and drank deeply before speaking. "Blackthorn wants to end the war," he said finally. "His kingdom is suffering as badly as ours. Crops unplanted because farmers are conscripted as soldiers, trade disrupted, resources depleted. He proposed a peace treaty with terms I found surprisingly reasonable." "What terms?" Edmund asked suspiciously. "A return to the pre-war borders, a mutual defense pact against external threats, and a marriage alliance to seal the peace." King Harold paused, meeting Edmund's eyes. "He has a daughter, 19 years old, by all accounts beautiful and well-educated. He proposes that she marry you, uniting our houses and making future conflict unlikely." Edmund felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath his feet. "What did you tell him?" "That I would consider his proposal and provide an answer within the week," King Harold said. Edmund, I know this is sudden, but you must understand the opportunity this represents. A marriage alliance would end the war, save countless lives, and potentially create a lasting peace between our kingdoms. A marriage alliance, Edmund repeated numbly, to a woman I've never met. A woman whose father has been trying to kill our soldiers for months. Politics makes strange bedfellows, King Harold said. Edmund, I will not force you into this marriage if you are truly opposed. But I ask you to think carefully about what is at stake. Your personal happiness against the lives of thousands. Your preference against your duty to the kingdom. Edmund sank into a chair, his mind reeling. Of course this would happen now. Of course, just when he had finally accepted that he could never have Rosalind, just when he had resigned himself to a life of duty over desire, the universe would present him with this impossible choice. Marry a stranger to end a war. Accept a loveless political union to fulfill his obligations as prince and heir. Abandon any hope of ever pursuing what his heart wanted in favor of what his kingdom needed. How long do I have to decide? Edmund asked quietly. Blackthorn wants an answer in a week, King Harold replied. But Edmund, there is something else you should know. If you refuse this marriage, the war continues. More men die, and eventually we may lose. Blackthorn's resources are not unlimited, but neither are ours. This conflict could drag on for years, devastating both kingdoms. The marriage is the quickest, cleanest path to peace. So my choice is to marry a stranger or condemn men to death, Edmund said bitterly. What a generous array of options. Welcome to kingship, King Harold said, not unkindly. The choices only get harder from here, son. But I have faith in you. Whatever you decide, I will support you. After his father left, Edmund sat alone in the tent for a long time, staring at nothing. His mind kept circling back to the same thoughts, the same impossible dilemma. If he agreed to the marriage, the war ended. Men returned to their families. Crops were planted. Trade resumed. Life went on. And Edmund would spend the rest of his existence bound to a woman he didn't love, fulfilling his duty while his heart remained with someone he could never have. If he refused, men died. The war continued. His kingdom suffered. And for what? The theoretical possibility that someday, somehow, he might find a way to be with Rosalind. A possibility so remote it barely qualified as hope. The rational choice was obvious. The dutiful choice was clear. And Edmund knew, with a certainty that made his chest ache, that he would make that choice because that was who he was. A prince, a future king, a man whose personal desires had never mattered and never would. But before he made it official, before he committed himself irrevocably to this path, he needed to see Rosalind one more time. He needed to tell her what was happening, to explain why he could never see her again, to say a proper goodbye instead of simply disappearing from her life. He owed her that much, at least. That night, Edmund approached Sir Marcus privately. I need to return to the capital for a day or two. Personal business that cannot wait. Sir Marcus frowned. Your Highness, the king wishes you to remain here while he considers Blackthorn's proposal. He may need to consult with you. I will return before the week is out, Edmund promised. Please, Sir Marcus, this is important. Perhaps the most important thing I will ever do. Something in Edmund's voice must have conveyed his desperation because Sir Marcus relented. Very well, Your Highness, but take a proper escort. The roads are still dangerous. Edmund left before dawn, accompanied by 4 guards riding hard for Ashford. The journey that had taken 4 days with the army took only 1 when traveling light and fast. They reached Ashford as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Edmund dismissed his guards at the edge of town, ordering them to wait at the local inn. Then he rode alone to Rosalind's farm, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread in equal measure. The cottage looked the same as it had months ago, smoke rising from the chimney, fields now green with young wheat. Edmund dismounted and approached the door, raising his hand to knock. The door opened before he could, and Rosalind stood framed in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the hearth. She wore a simple dress of pale blue, her hair loose around her shoulders for once instead of braided. She looked even more beautiful than Edmund remembered, and the sight of her made his breath catch. Edmund, she breathed, and hearing his name on her lips after so many months sent a thrill through him. What are you doing here? I heard about the war, about the Battle of River Crossing. Are you injured? No, Edmund said. I'm fine. Rosalind, I need to talk to you. Please. Rosalind glanced over her shoulder into the cottage. My father is visiting neighbors. He won't be back for an hour. Come inside. Edmund followed her into the small, neat cottage. It was humble but well kept, with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, shelves holding simple dishes and cooking implements. A single window let in the fading daylight. Rosalind turned to face him, and Edmund saw worry in her eyes. What's wrong? Why are you here? Edmund took a deep breath. Lord Blackthorn has proposed a peace treaty. Part of the terms include a marriage alliance between me and his daughter. Rosalind's face went pale. I see. I haven't agreed yet, Edmund said quickly. But Rosalind, I will have to agree. You understand that, don't you? If I refuse, the war continues. Men die. The kingdom suffers. I cannot put my personal feelings above the welfare of thousands. Of course not, Rosalind said quietly. You are a prince. You must do your duty. That's why I came, Edmund said, moving closer to her. Before I agree to this marriage, before I commit myself to a life with someone else, I needed to see you one more time. I needed to tell you that these past months, thinking about you has been the only thing that kept me sane, that saved my life at River Crossing because I fought harder than I should have, took risks I shouldn't have taken, all because some part of me believed that if I survived, I might see you again. Rosalind's eyes filled with tears. Edmund, please don't. I love you, Edmund interrupted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I know I have no right to say it. I know nothing can come of it, but I needed you to know. Needed to say it out loud at least once before I marry someone else and spend the rest of my life pretending I don't feel this way. A tear spilled down Rosalind's cheek. You can't say these things to me. It's not fair. I know, Edmund said. Nothing about this is fair. Not to you, not to me, not to the woman I'm going to marry. But life isn't fair, Rosalind. You taught me that. That first day in the market square. You showed me that truth doesn't change just because we wish it to. Rosalind closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. I love you too, she whispered. I have tried so hard not to. I have told myself 1,000 times that it's foolish, that it can only bring pain. But I cannot help it. When I heard about the battle, when I thought you might have died, I felt as though my own heart had stopped beating. Edmund pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, wildflowers and wood smoke and something uniquely her. For a moment they simply stood there, two people who loved each other and could never be together, stealing a moment of comfort in a world that would not allow them more. What do we do? Rosalind asked, her voice muffled against his chest. We say goodbye, Edmund said, though the words felt like knives in his throat. We accept that this is all we can have, this moment, this confession, this embrace, and then we let each other go. Rosalind pulled back to look up at him. Just like that? We just give up? What choice do we have? Edmund asked desperately. Tell me, Rosalind. Tell me there's another way, and I will take it. But I cannot see one. I cannot see any path where we both get what we want without destroying everything else. Then kiss me, Rosalind said suddenly. Just once. Give me that memory to hold on to. Edmund didn't hesitate. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, and it was everything he had imagined and more, sweet and desperate and tinged with the salt of her tears, a kiss that spoke of love and longing and loss all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying. I should go, Edmund said hoarsely. Your father will be back soon, and I can't do this anymore. I'm not strong enough. Neither am I, Rosalind admitted. But we'll survive this, Edmund. Somehow we'll both survive. We're stronger than we think. Edmund kissed her forehead one last time, then forced himself to walk to the door. At the threshold he turned back. I will think of you every day, he said. Until the day I die, I will think of you and love you and wish things could have been different. And I will do the same, Rosalind replied. Go now, before I lose my courage and beg you to stay. Edmund left, mounting his horse with hands that shook. He rode away without looking back, knowing that if he did, he would never be able to leave. 2 days later, Edmund informed his father that he would accept Lord Blackthorn's proposal. The wedding was set for 6 weeks hence, and Edmund began preparing himself for a life without love, sustained only by the memory of one perfect kiss and the knowledge that somewhere in the world, a woman with brown eyes and a brave heart loved him as he loved her. It would have to be enough. The castle buzzed with preparations for the royal wedding. Seamstresses arrived daily with fabrics and designs for Edmund's ceremonial garments. Diplomats negotiated the finer points of the peace treaty. Musicians rehearsed, cooks planned elaborate feasts, and servants scrubbed every surface until the stone walls gleamed. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the union that would end the war and usher in a new era of peace. Edmund moved through it all like a ghost, participating when required, but feeling detached from everything around him. He met his bride-to-be, Lady Helena of Northmarch, when she arrived with her father 3 weeks before the ceremony. She was indeed beautiful, with golden hair that fell in elaborate curls past her shoulders, pale skin, and eyes the color of sapphires. She was gracious and well-spoken, educated in history and literature, skilled in music and embroidery, everything a prince could want in a wife. Edmund felt nothing when he looked at her. No spark, no connection, no hint of the overwhelming emotion that flooded through him whenever he thought of Rosalind. Helena was a stranger who would become his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in ruling the kingdom, but she would never be the owner of his heart, because that belonged irrevocably to a farmer's daughter he could never have. "You seem troubled, my prince," Helena observed during one of their chaperoned meetings in the castle gardens. They walked along a gravel path bordered by roses, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a proper distance maintained between them. "Is the prospect of marriage so distressing?" Edmund forced himself to smile. "Not at all, my lady. Forgive me. My mind has been occupied with military matters. The transition from war to peace requires careful management." It was a diplomatic lie, and Helena seemed to accept it, though something in her expression suggested she knew he wasn't being entirely truthful. "I understand this union is not what either of us might have chosen for ourselves," she said carefully. "We are both doing our duty to our kingdoms, but I hope in time we might at least become friends, perhaps even find some measure of contentment together." "I hope so as well," Edmund replied. And at least that much was true. Helena deserved better than a husband who would spend their entire marriage pining for someone else. She deserved someone who could love her fully, without reservation. But that was not what fate had given her, and Edmund could only hope to be kind, respectful, and honorable in a marriage that would never be based on love. Geoffrey found Edmund alone in his chambers 2 nights before the wedding, staring out the window at the darkened countryside. "I brought wine," Geoffrey announced, holding up a bottle. "I thought you might need it." "I don't think there's enough wine in the kingdom to make me ready for this wedding," Edmund said bleakly. Geoffrey poured 2 goblets and handed one to his brother. "She seems nice. Helena, I mean. Pleasant, intelligent. Could be worse." "Could it?" Edmund asked. "Could it really be worse than marrying someone you don't love while being in love with someone you can never have?" Geoffrey was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "It could be worse. You could be married to someone cruel or stupid. You could be at war, watching men die every day. You could be dead yourself, killed at river crossing, never having known love at all." He paused. "I know that's cold comfort, Edmund. I know it doesn't make the pain go away. But perspective helps sometimes." "Did it help you?" Edmund asked. "With Margaret?" "Eventually," Geoffrey admitted. "Not at first. At first I wanted to die. Every morning I woke up next to Catherine was a reminder of what I'd lost. But gradually, over time, I learned to accept my reality, to find small joys where I could. Catherine and I will never be passionate lovers, but we've developed a partnership built on mutual respect. We laugh sometimes, we support each other. It's not the grand romance of the ballads, but it's something, and something is better than nothing." Edmund took a long drink of wine. "I went to see her, Rosalind, before I agreed to the marriage. I needed to say goodbye." Geoffrey's eyes widened. "Edmund, that was foolish, selfish." "I know," Edmund interrupted, "but I don't regret it. I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me. We kissed once, and then I left. And now I will carry that memory for the rest of my life. A single perfect moment in a lifetime of duty and obligation." "Does Helena know?" Geoffrey asked quietly. "About Rosalind?" "No, and she never will. That's my burden to carry, not hers." Edmund set down his goblet and turned to face his brother. "Geoffrey, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if I die before father and you become king, I need you to ensure that Rosalind and her father are protected, that their farm is secure, that they never want for anything. Can you do that for me?" Geoffrey studied his brother's face for a long moment. "You really love her, don't you? This isn't just infatuation or rebellion against your duty. You genuinely love this woman. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone," Edmund confirmed. "So yes, I need to know that even if I can't be with her, even if I can't give her anything else, I can at least ensure she's safe and cared for. Promise me, Geoffrey." "I promise," Geoffrey said solemnly, "though I pray it never comes to that. I pray you live a long, boring life filled with council meetings and state dinners and managing a kingdom, and that you find some measure of peace along the way." "Thank you," Edmund said, "for understanding, for not judging." "How could I judge?" Geoffrey asked with a sad smile. "I've walked this same road, brother. I know exactly how it feels." The day before the wedding, Edmund received an unexpected visitor. He was in the armory, ostensibly inspecting weapons, but really just seeking solitude, when a page found him. "Your Highness, there's a man at the gates asking to see you. He says his name is William Ashford, and that it's urgent." Edmund's heart stopped. William Ashford, Rosalind's father. What was he doing here? Had something happened to her? Edmund practically ran to the gates, not caring how undignified it looked. William stood just inside, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his simple farmer's clothes, amidst the castle's splendor. His face was grave, and Edmund's worst fears seemed confirmed. "Is she hurt?" Edmund demanded without preamble. "Is Rosalind injured or ill? Tell me." William held up a hand. "She is physically well, Your Highness, but I needed to speak with you before your wedding tomorrow. May we talk somewhere private?" Edmund led William to a small study off the main hall, closing the door behind them. "What's happened? Why are you here?" William took a deep breath. "Your Highness, I am a simple man. I know little of politics or the ways of nobility. But I know my daughter, and I know that since your visit to our farm weeks ago she has been broken. She goes through the motions of living, but there is no light in her eyes. She doesn't sing anymore. She barely eats. And yesterday, I found her in the fields, weeping as though her heart would shatter." Edmund felt as though he'd been punched. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I never meant to cause her pain. I thought it would be better to be honest with her, to say goodbye properly than to simply disappear from her life without explanation." "Perhaps it would have been," William agreed. "But Your Highness, I did not come here to accuse you of wrongdoing. I came to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you love my daughter?" "Yes," Edmund said without hesitation. "More than anything in this world." "And she loves you," William said, "which presents us with a terrible problem. Tomorrow you marry another woman, and my daughter's heart breaks permanently. She will spend the rest of her life knowing that the man she loves is bound to someone else, and that knowledge will poison every day she has left." "I know," Edmund said desperately. "Don't you think I know that? Don't you think it tears me apart? But what choice do I have? I am a prince. I have duties, responsibilities. I cannot abandon my kingdom for personal happiness, no matter how much I might want to." William was quiet for a long moment, then said something Edmund never expected. "Run away with her." Edmund stared at him in shock. "What?" "Run away with my daughter," William repeated. "Tonight, before the wedding. Take her far from here, to a place where no one knows you're a prince and she's a farmer's daughter. Live the life you both want, free from the constraints of your birth." "That's impossible," Edmund said, though his heart raced at the very idea. "I cannot abandon my kingdom. I cannot break the peace treaty. If I flee on the eve of my wedding, the war will resume. Lord Blackthorne will see it as a betrayal, an insult to his daughter. Thousands will die because I chose personal happiness over duty." "Yes," William acknowledged, "that is the cost, and it is a terrible cost. But Your Highness, let me tell you about costs. I lost my wife 10 years ago to a fever. In those final days, as she lay dying, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I would not let our daughter make the same mistake she had made." "What mistake?" Edmund asked. "My wife was in love with another man when we married," William said quietly. "A merchant's son from the next town over. But her father disapproved, said the match was beneath her family, and forced her to marry me instead. She was a good wife, a wonderful mother, and I loved her dearly. But she never loved me, not truly. And every day of our marriage, I knew that her heart belonged to someone else. It poisoned our happiness, Your Highness. We had moments of contentment, yes, but never true joy. And on her deathbed she begged me not to let the same thing happen to Rosalind. Edmund felt tears burning in his eyes. I'm sorry. That must have been unbearable for you. It was, William agreed. But I survived it because I loved her, and because I knew she was doing her best to be a good wife despite her divided heart. But Your Highness, I don't want that life for my daughter. I don't want her to spend decades married to some farmer or tradesman while her heart belongs to you. And I don't want you to spend your life married to Lady Helena while your heart belongs to Rosalind. Life is too short, and love is too precious to waste on duty and obligation. You're asking me to choose between love and the lives of thousands, Edmund said. How can I make that choice? How can I live with myself if I choose my own happiness over the welfare of my people? How can you live with yourself if you don't? William countered. Your Highness, you are young. You think you can survive a loveless marriage, that you can find contentment in duty and honor. But I have lived that life, and I can tell you, it's no life at all. You will wake up 20 years from now, old and bitter, wondering what might have been, and my daughter will do the same. Is that really better than fighting for the chance to be happy? Edmund turned away, moving to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Tomorrow that sun would rise on his wedding day, on the day he would bind himself to Helena forever and say goodbye to any hope of being with Rosalind. Unless, if I did this, Edmund said slowly, not quite believing he was even considering it. If I ran away with Rosalind, what would happen to you? Lord Blackthorne would demand retribution. My father would be humiliated. You and Rosalind would be hunted as criminals who corrupted a prince. Then we run too, William said simply. The three of us. We disappear completely, start over somewhere far away where the reach of kings and lords cannot touch us. It would be hard, Your Highness. Harder than anything you've ever done. You would have to give up your title, your wealth, your identity. You would be just a man, living by the work of your hands. Could you do that? Could you give up everything you are for love? Edmund thought about his life. The castle, the servants, the power and privilege, the weight of the crown that would one day rest on his head, the councils and courts and endless diplomatic maneuvers, everything he had been born to, everything he had been raised to be. And then he thought about Rosalind, her smile, her courage, the way she challenged him to think differently about the world, the feel of her in his arms, the taste of her kiss, the sound of her voice saying she loved him. Could he give up everything for that? Could he walk away from his destiny for the chance to build a life with her? I need to think, Edmund said. This decision, it's too important to make in haste. Give me until midnight. If I decide to go through with this madness, I will come to your farm then. If I don't come, you'll know I've chosen duty over love. William nodded. Midnight then. But Your Highness, whatever you decide, know that Rosalind and I will support it. We understand the weight of what you carry. We understand the impossible position you're in. There is no wrong answer here, only different kinds of sacrifice. After William left, Edmund returned to his chambers and dismissed his servants, wanting to be alone. He sat in the darkness, wrestling with the most important decision of his life. Duty or love, kingdom or heart, the life he was born to or the life he desperately wanted. Geoffrey's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the most difficult thing we can do is acknowledge a truth and then choose not to let it control us. But William's words were just as powerful. Life is too short, and love is too precious, to waste on duty and obligation. Edmund thought about his father, about the disappointment and anger King Harold would feel if his son disappeared on the eve of a marriage that would bring peace. He thought about Helena, left at the altar, humiliated before both kingdoms. He thought about the soldiers who would have to fight again when the war resumed, about the families who would lose sons and fathers and brothers. The cost of love was staggeringly high, but then he thought about spending the rest of his life watching Rosalind from afar, knowing she was out there somewhere, married to someone else, living a half-life just as he would be. He thought about waking up next to Helena for 40 years, always wishing she was someone else. He thought about dying never having truly lived, never having fought for the one thing that made him feel truly alive. The cost of duty was equally devastating. As midnight approached, Edmund stood at his window, staring out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, 3 miles north of Ashford, Rosalind was waiting to see if he would come. William was probably saddling horses, packing supplies for a journey into the unknown. And Edmund had to choose. His hand moved to the clasp of his royal cloak, fingers touching the silver lion that marked him as a Prince of Wessex. He could remove that cloak, walk out of this castle, and never look back. He could choose love over duty, heart over honor, personal happiness over the greater good. Or he could leave the cloak where it was, walk down to the Great Hall tomorrow, and marry Helena as planned. He could be the prince everyone expected him to be, the king his father needed him to become. The choice was his, and his alone. Edmund closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made his decision. Edmund removed the cloak. The silver clasp fell open with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the silent chamber. The heavy fabric slipped from his shoulders and pooled on the floor at his feet, a prince's garment discarded like a snake shedding its skin. Edmund stared at it for a long moment, at the royal crest embroidered in golden thread, at the symbol of everything he was about to abandon. Then he turned away and began to prepare. He changed into simple traveling clothes, a plain tunic, worn breeches, sturdy boots. He packed a small bag with a few essentials, a knife, flint and steel, a water skin, what coins he had in his personal possession. He moved quietly, efficiently, his heart pounding but his hands steady. This was it, the point of no return. A knock at the door nearly stopped his heart. Edmund froze, the bag half packed on his bed. "Edmund?" Geoffrey's voice came through the heavy oak. "I know you're awake. I can see the light under your door. Let me in." Edmund considered not answering, simply waiting until his brother gave up and left. But Geoffrey knew him too well. If Edmund didn't respond, Geoffrey would raise an alarm, would call the guards, would prevent him from leaving. Edmund opened the door. Geoffrey took one look at Edmund's clothes, at the packed bag visible on the bed, and his eyes widened in understanding. "No," he said quietly. "Edmund, no. Tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." "I have to," Edmund said, stepping back to let his brother enter and quickly closing the door behind him. "Geoffrey, I can't marry Helena tomorrow. I can't spend the rest of my life pretending to be something I'm not, pretending to love someone I don't, while the woman I actually love lives alone and heartbroken. I can't." "So you're going to run away?" Geoffrey demanded, his voice rising before he caught himself and lowered it to an urgent whisper. "You're going to abandon your kingdom, your duty, everything you are, for a peasant girl?" "Not for a peasant girl," Edmund corrected. "For the woman I love. For the chance to be happy, Geoffrey. For the chance to live a life that's mine, not one that was planned for me before I was even born." Geoffrey ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Do you have any idea what this will do? The chaos it will cause? Father will be devastated. The alliance with Blackthorn will collapse. The war will resume. Men will die, Edmund. Hundreds, maybe thousands of men will die because you chose to follow your heart instead of your head." "I know," Edmund said, and the words felt like broken glass in his throat. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't spent the last hours torturing myself with exactly those thoughts? But Geoffrey, I also know what will happen if I stay. I'll marry Helena. I'll be a decent husband to her, a good prince, eventually a competent king, and I'll be miserable every single day of my life. Is that really better? Is a lifetime of quiet desperation really worth avoiding conflict?" "Yes," Geoffrey practically shouted, then caught himself again. "Yes, Edmund, it is. Because your quiet desperation affects only you. Your running away affects thousands. How can you possibly justify that?" Edmund sat down heavily on the edge of his bed. "Do you remember the story you told me? About the fisherman and the star? What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," Edmund said. "You told me that story to convince me to let Rosalind go. To prove that keeping something you love, when it's not meant to be kept, only destroys it. But Geoffrey, you had the moral of that story wrong." Geoffrey frowned. "What do you mean?" "The fisherman let the star go because keeping it was killing it," Edmund explained. "But what about the fisherman? What happened to him after? You said he spent the rest of his life looking up at that star, missing it, loving it from afar. But did he ever love anything else? Did he ever find joy again? Or did he spend every night staring at the sky, filled with regret?" "The story doesn't say." Geoffrey admitted. Exactly, Edmund said. Because the story is about the star, not the fisherman. It's about letting go of what you love to save it. But I'm not trying to save Rosalind by staying away from her, Geoffrey. I'm not protecting her. I'm protecting the kingdom, protecting the peace, protecting everyone except the two people who actually matter to me, her and myself. Geoffrey was quiet for a long moment. So what are you saying? That you should be selfish? That your happiness matters more than your duty? I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, I have a right to choose my own life, Edmund said. I'm saying that I didn't ask to be born a prince. I didn't choose this burden of duty and obligation. It was thrust upon me by accident of birth. And while I've carried that burden faithfully for 24 years, while I've always put the kingdom first, maybe, just this once, I'm allowed to put myself first. That's not how being a prince works, Geoffrey protested. You don't get to pick and choose when duty applies. Then maybe I don't want to be a prince anymore, Edmund said quietly. Maybe I want to be just a man who loves a woman and wants to build a life with her. Is that so terrible, Geoffrey? Is wanting to be happy such a crime? Geoffrey sat down beside his brother, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler. No, it's not terrible or criminal. It's human. And God help me, Edmund, I understand. I understand more than you know. But understanding doesn't change the consequences. If you leave tonight, if you don't show up for that wedding tomorrow, do you know what will happen? Tell me, Edmund said. Father will be furious, Geoffrey began. Humiliated before Blackthorn and both kingdoms. Helena will be devastated. Yes, I know you don't love her, but she doesn't deserve to be abandoned at the altar. Blackthorn will see this as an insult, possibly even an act of aggression. The peace treaty will collapse. The war will resume within weeks. And Father is old, Edmund. Older than he looks. More tired than he admits. This betrayal, this stress, could kill him. And then I become king. Me. The younger son who was never supposed to rule, who doesn't want to rule, who isn't ready to rule. Is that what you want? Is that the legacy you want to leave? Each word was a dagger to Edmund's heart, because he knew Geoffrey was right. Everything his brother described would happen, and the consequences would be catastrophic. And what about Rosalind? Geoffrey continued relentlessly. Do you think you can really protect her by running away together? Do you think Father won't send soldiers to find you? Do you think Blackthorn won't demand retribution? You'll be hunted, Edmund. Both of you. You'll spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders, never safe, never settled. Is that the life you want to give her? Is that love? Edmund put his head in his hands. Then what should I do? Tell me, Geoffrey. You seem to have all the answers. What's the right choice here? Geoffrey was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Because I look at you, and I see myself 2 years ago. I see the same pain, the same longing, the same desperate desire to choose love over duty. And I made the dutiful choice. I married Catherine. I did what was expected of me. And every single day since, I've wondered if I made a mistake. Edmund looked up in surprise. You never said that before. Because admitting it would make it real, Geoffrey said. Because if I acknowledge that I might have made the wrong choice, that I might have given up my one chance at true happiness for nothing, then I have to live with that knowledge. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to bear that weight. So what are you saying? That I should run? That I should choose love? Geoffrey stood and walked to the window, staring out at the night. I'm saying that I can't make this decision for you. And neither can Father, or the kingdom, or duty, or honor. This is your choice, Edmund. Yours alone. And whatever you decide, whatever consequences follow, you'll have to live with them for the rest of your life. He turned back to face his brother. But I will tell you this. If you stay, if you marry Helena tomorrow, there's a part of you that will die. The part that believes in love, in passion, in choosing your own path. You'll become what Father is, a good king, a dutiful ruler, but a man who has sacrificed everything personal for the sake of the crown. And maybe that's noble. Maybe that's what kingship demands. But Edmund, you'll be hollow inside, empty, going through the motions of life without ever really living. And if I go? Edmund asked. If you go, you'll cause chaos and pain and suffering. People will die because of your choice. Father will never forgive you. History will remember you as the prince who abandoned his duty for selfish desire. But you'll be free, Edmund. You'll have chosen your own path. You'll have fought for love instead of accepting a loveless existence. And maybe, in the end, that matters more than anything else. Geoffrey moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. There's one more thing you should know. Father suspects something. He asked me earlier today if I thought you would go through with the wedding. I told him yes, that you understood your duty. But he knows you better than I thought. He said, if Edmund runs, I won't pursue him. I'll let him go, because a king needs to choose his crown. If Edmund chooses differently, then he was never meant to be king. Edmund's eyes widened. Father said that? He did. He also said that if you do run, he'll tell Blackthorn you died of a sudden illness on the eve of the wedding. He'll offer to marry me to Helena instead, to preserve the peace. He's already thought it all through, Edmund. He's given you permission to leave, even if he'll never say it out loud. Geoffrey opened the door. It's nearly midnight, brother. If you're going to Rosalind's farm, you need to leave now. If you're going to stay, you need to unpack that bag and get some sleep before your wedding. But whichever choice you make it fully. Don't spend the rest of your life wondering, what if? Choose your path and walk it without regret. After Geoffrey left, Edmund stood alone in his chambers, the packed bag on his bed, simple traveling clothes on his body, royal cloak pooled on the floor. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like physical force. He thought about Rosalind waiting for him, hope and fear warring in her heart. He thought about Helena, innocent in all of this, preparing for a wedding that might never happen. He thought about his father, old and tired, willing to let his son go if it meant Edmund could be happy. He thought about Geoffrey, carrying the burden of his own regrets, trying to help his brother avoid the same fate. And he thought about himself, about who he was and who he wanted to be, about the life he'd been born to and the life he desperately wanted. Edmund picked up the bag. Then he picked up the royal cloak from the floor, staring at it one last time. The silver lion gleamed in the candlelight, a symbol of power and duty and everything he was about to walk away from. He folded the cloak carefully and placed it on the bed, next to a letter he'd written earlier and then hidden, unsure if he'd ever send it. A letter to his father, explaining his choice, asking for forgiveness, promising that he would always love his family, even if he could no longer be part of it. Edmund extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. Then he slipped out of his chambers, moving silently through corridors he'd walked his entire life, past guards who nodded respectfully, through doors he'd opened 1,000 times. No one stopped him. No one questioned why the prince was wandering the castle late at night in common clothes. They probably assumed he was nervous about the wedding, seeking solitude to calm his nerves. If only they knew. Edmund reached the stables and saddled a horse himself, not his usual destrier, but a sturdy bay mare that would serve well for long-distance travel. He led her quietly out of the castle grounds, not mounting until he was well away from the gates. Then he rode hard for Ashford, his heart pounding with fear and exhilaration, and the overwhelming sense that he was making either the best or worst decision of his life. The farm appeared in the darkness, a single light burning in the cottage window. Edmund dismounted and approached on foot, and before he could knock, the door flew open. Rosalind stood there, tears streaming down her face. "You came," she breathed. "I didn't think you would. I was so afraid you'd choose duty over." Edmund pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. Love and fear and desperate hope. When they finally broke apart, both were crying. "I chose you," Edmund said simply. "I chose us. I chose the possibility of happiness over the certainty of a gilded cage. I don't know if it's the right choice, Rosalind. I don't know if I'll regret it tomorrow or a year from now or on my deathbed. But I know I couldn't marry someone else while you existed in the world. I couldn't spend my life wondering what might have been." William emerged from the cottage leading 2 horses already saddled and packed with supplies. "Then we need to leave now, Your Highness. By dawn, they'll discover you're missing. We need to be as far away as possible by then." "Stop calling me Your Highness," Edmund said, though he smiled as he said it. "That person doesn't exist anymore. I'm just Edmund now, just a man who loves your daughter and wants to build a life with her." "Then let's go, just Edmund," William said. "Let's disappear into the night and find a place where princes and farmers don't exist, where there's only people trying to live and love as best they can." They mounted their horses and rode into the darkness, leaving behind the only life Edmund had ever known. They rode through what remained of the night, putting miles between themselves and the castle, heading toward the coast where William had arranged passage on a merchant ship that would take them far from England, to lands where no one knew Edmund's face. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Edmund looked back one last time. He could see the castle in the distance, a dark silhouette against the lightening sky. Somewhere in that castle, Geoffrey was probably just discovering his brother's absence. Somewhere, servants were beginning to panic as they realized the groom had vanished on his wedding day. Edmund felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was almost physical. But then Rosalind reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm and strong in his, and he knew he had made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the dutiful choice, not the choice that would make him a hero in the history books, but the choice that made him happy, the choice that gave him a chance at a real life, with real love, free from the burden of a crown he'd never wanted. "Are you ready?" Rosalind asked softly. Edmund squeezed her hand and smiled. "I'm terrified, but yes, I'm ready." They rode on toward the rising sun, toward an uncertain future, toward a life they would have to build from nothing. Behind them, the kingdom Edmund had abandoned would survive. Geoffrey would marry Helena, the peace would hold, life would go on, and ahead of them lay possibility. The possibility of a small farm somewhere far away, where Edmund could work with his hands and Rosalind could sing while she cooked. The possibility of children who would never know their father had once been a prince. The possibility of growing old together, facing hardships and joys as partners, as equals, as two people who had chosen each other above everything else. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard times, moments of doubt, days when Edmund wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. But there would also be moments of perfect happiness, waking up next to the woman he loved, watching her smile, hearing her laugh, knowing that they had fought for their right to be together and won. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming their faces, Edmund made a silent vow. He would make this sacrifice worthwhile. He would build a life with Rosalind that honored the cost of their choice. He would love her with everything he had, every day for the rest of his life, and he would never take for granted the incredible gift of freedom they had seized together. Behind them, in a castle that felt more like a prison with each passing mile, Geoffrey opened the letter his brother had left. He read it slowly, tears streaming down his face, understanding completely the choice Edmund had made, because he had once been offered the same choice and taken the opposite path. Geoffrey folded the letter carefully and placed it in the fire, watching it burn. Then he went to inform their father that Prince Edmund had died suddenly in the night of an unknown illness, and that he, Prince Geoffrey, would marry Lady Helena in his brother's place to preserve the peace between kingdoms. King Harold received the news with surprising calm, as if he had expected it. He asked no questions about the nature of Edmund's illness or why there would be no body to bury. He simply nodded, placed a hand on Geoffrey's shoulder and said, "Then you are the heir now, my son. May you carry that burden more lightly than your brother did." The wedding proceeded as planned, with Geoffrey standing in Edmund's place. Helena was confused and hurt, but she accepted the substitution with grace. The peace treaty was signed. The war ended. Life continued. And far away, in a small coastal village in a foreign land, a man who had once been a prince worked alongside his wife in the fields they had purchased with the last of his royal coins. They were poor but happy, free but cautious, always aware that their past could catch up to them, but choosing to live in the present rather than fear the future. On their first anniversary of leaving England, Edmund and Rosalind stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant colors. Rosalind's hand rested on her swollen belly. Their first child would arrive before winter. "Do you regret it?" Rosalind asked quietly. "Giving up everything you were for this life?" Edmund pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I regret the pain I caused. I regret that people suffered because of my choice. I regret that my father lost a son and my brother gained a burden he didn't want. But do I regret choosing you? Choosing us? Not for a single moment. Even though we have so little?" Rosalind gestured at their modest cottage visible in the valley below, at the small farm that required constant work, at the simple life they led. "Especially because we have so little," Edmund said. "Because everything we have, we've built together. No one gave it to us. No one arranged it for political advantage. It's ours, Rosalind. Truly ours." and that makes it worth more than all the gold in my father's treasury." Rosalind turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face, a face more weathered now, tanned by the sun, marked by honest labor. "I love you, Edmund. Not the prince you were, but the man you became, the man who had the courage to choose love over duty, freedom over obligation, happiness over honor." "Honor is overrated," Edmund said with a smile. "Happiness with you is worth any price." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had defied kingdoms and tradition and duty itself for the chance to be together. Their future was uncertain, their past could never be entirely escaped, and their present was filled with hard work and modest circumstances. But they were together, they were free, they were happy, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The story of Prince Edmund who vanished on the eve of his wedding became a legend in England, whispered about in taverns and sung about by minstrels. Some said he had been murdered by Lord Blackthorn's agents. Others claimed he had been called away by God to serve a higher purpose. A few romantics suggested he had run away for love, but this was dismissed as fantasy. Princes didn't abandon their duties for peasant girls. Only a handful of people knew the truth. King Harold took it to his grave. Geoffrey, who ruled wisely and well for 40 years, never spoke of it. And in a small village far from England, an old man and his wife told their grandchildren bedtime stories about a prince who loved a farmer's daughter so much that he gave up his crown to be with her. The children always asked if it was a true story. "Every word," the old man would say, squeezing his wife's hand. "Every single word." And they lived happily ever after, not because their life was perfect or easy or free from struggle, but because they had chosen each other, and that choice had made all the difference.